If counterpoints can promise me that he won't have terrible takes, then I will stay out. But of course he cannot. So topic one.
I was about to say we're talking about the 1619 project. It's gonna be interesting.
Topic one. The 1619 project has sought to expand and shift our way of thinking of America's past and present. It recontextualizes the relationship between race, politics, and the economy. Many school districts around the country are moving to integrate it into their curriculum, while others are trying to restrict it. This, predictably, falls strictly across partisan lines. So, do you think the 1619 project is a positive addition to the educational landscape, or should it be relegated to the political sphere and left out of the classroom? All right, I got a I got a bunch of non-black people to talk about this. I think this is going to be great. I think it's going to be fantastic. I'm very excited. All right, we'll start with Chud Logic. Could be black. I actually don't know that for sure. Right? So Chud Logic, buddy.
So could Doopy.
Yeah, no.
Well, actually, I'm like 2.5%.
I mean, if you need me to, don't worry. I can accommodate. Okay, it's all good.
All good. Thank you so much, friend. All right.
Bit of a digital blackface.
1 minute on the clock, please.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so my basic take on this, I didn't know anything about this before today. I've had to look into it, so thanks for that. The 1619 Project is a journalistic endeavor to address and explore the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans. It's also used now as a foundational resource to help teachers educate students on these issues from K-12 all the way through to post-secondary education. While no means perfect, it doesn't really make sense to me. On the one hand, one thing I've noted is that this assertion that it's political, as if it's some negative quality or aspect. This is about history, and history is always going to be inherently political. And secondary to that, to suggest it should be left out of the classroom, even with any flaws that have been pointed out by good faith critics, and there are good faith criticisms of this project, which is fine. We can talk about that. I do not believe that the issues of 1619 are in excess of other resources that exist and have led to other outcomes in teaching the history of slavery in the classroom. The truth of the matter is you cannot levy critique at the 1619 Project that cannot be levied at other aspects of education of history in the United States. It just happens that people, often conservatives, take issue specifically with a project that aims to explore the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans. The only question we have to ask here is why? And that's it.
Rodicus.
The 1619 Project, it needs to be left out of the classroom. It needs to be left out of at least K through 12. It needs to be discussed when you can have the basic ideologies of what history actually is. What we need to do is we need to teach history. We need to teach history first, and what actually history is. And what history is not is that America did not start in 1619. America started in 1776 when we signed the Declaration of Independence. The fact that historians are arguing that America instead started in 1619 because when the first slave trade arrived in America is absolutely abhorrent. One of the claims of 1619 is one of the primary reasons the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery. This is widely gone against. This was not the reason that American colonies decided to revolt against the British government, was to protect slavery. So I think it should be left for the political spheres where we can debate it here, rather than teaching it to young children who are very impressionable.
Thanks so much, and thanks for keeping to time. Nice work, Sprouticus. Conservatives for the win once again. All right. Next, counterpoints. Conservatives about to lose. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think you can have noble aims with the 1619 Project. I think basically the thing that I've read repeatedly was that it aims to recontextualize history from alternative perspectives that haven't been considered in the past. I think that's a noble aim. What I do think that most honkies, speaking as the king of honkies, basically the concern is that America is going to be singled out as a uniquely evil place, that white people in general are going to be singled out as a uniquely evil force in history, and that it's basically going to be like just an inversion of the political rhetoric that we probably had for the past 100 years, in which white people were always the saviors and the heroes and all that kind of stuff. So how about, instead of saying that white people are uniquely good and amazing, or white people are uniquely bad and terrible, why don't we just analyze history through a variety of lenses so we have a very interesting, nuanced, and complex take, and also understand that histories are going to be different based on perspective. So I'll leave it there.
Oh, wow. 1 second over. So, call me shocked. All right, moving on. Thank you. Sock, please.
Yeah, the 1619 project. I've done a decent amount of research, not like too much, but I would say that bits and pieces of it could be useful in the educational system. Maybe not cover the whole thing. As some of the other panelists have said, like I think that there were some questionable information in the 1619 project that isn't like agreed upon among all historians. So I think that bits and pieces are good. The whole thing, maybe not so much. So centrist take sucks.
Thank you. Gooby.
I'm actually pretty sympathetic to some of the aims of the 1619 project. And I don't really have a problem with it, like, as like a topic of discussion within classrooms. I just don't want them to revise history when they're doing it, right? So if they'd like to refocus and like shape a narrative, within within like American history, that's more fair to Black Americans, that gives more context to a lot of the to Jim Crow, to slavery, to all these things, even to the Revolution. That's totally fine. I think the fair criticism that I've seen primarily about what they say about the Revolution, and then like onward about like sugar and the prison system and all these things, kind of being focused on the fear of Black people, right? And but how America's like an inherently racist country. I think so long as you kind of avoid that stuff, I'm fine with it. I think it's okay.
Adorano.
I know how to work a computer. For this, I think the one issue I would probably have with the 1619 project would be I don't really think that history, if we are going to go ahead and try to revise curriculum, should be done by journalists. They're historians for this. And I do know that part of what journalists can go ahead and focus on is this topic, but I just feel like I'd be a bit more comfortable with historians. But I think overall, it's kind of inevitable if we are going to go through and recontextualize like our history, that it will need to be rewritten, but it's not being rewritten more as it is being corrected. So overall, I think the aims of the 1619 project are very very noble, and I think they're to be desired. I just probably would have more of my qualms with the qualifications of people, as I am an elitist leftist. So, yeah.
Perfectly on time. Dylan Burns.
So I will like to say that there probably are inaccuracies within the 1619 projects, and ultimately I would agree if anything is historically inaccurate. One of the things that is talked about, well, 1619, we don't know if that's really when slavery started. We can actually talk about Columbus and all this different stuff. That's like fair. But let's be clear that the reason why this is being attacked isn't because of historical inaccuracies. If it was, then I would see a lot more lambasting of the 1776 Commission, which never even talked to historians of any sort, and is a flush with inaccuracies, and is nothing more than nationalistic chest beating. The reason why it is being attacked so thoroughly is because of the offering of, number one, a different perspective, and number two, that it says a lot of stuff in it that is 100% true. If you go through the about 16 or so article titles and the articles that are in here, let's just read some of the headlines and some of the things that it proposed. America wasn't a democracy until Black Americans made it one. I agree with that. You know what? To say that 1776 is when democracy flourished is kind of weird when you say a huge part of your population, due to the color of their skin, you know what? They can't participate in democracy. Is that a true democracy? I don't really think so. What's the next one? American capitalism is brutal. You can trace that to the plantation. I think the treatment of workers, low-skilled workers, and particularly workers in prisons today, you can trace a lot of that to the need for cheap labor and not wanting to compensate them properly for their labor. Then you go to how false beliefs and physical racial differences still live in medicine today. All you need to do is look how Black women have particularly been treated during childbirth and the amount of medicine they are given in comparison to white women. to see that there are manifestations and stereotypes that have manifest today. So while I can say, you know what, I agree with this or that specific criticism, the overarching narrative that has been used to attack the 1619 project seems like a lot of people coping with the fact that Granddaddy was kind of a racist prick.
Okay, all right. Gillibrand's taking the counterpoints position of taking a long time to do an introduction, but thank you. It was actually very informative, though. Lorna Box.
Okay, I'll try to keep this just to maybe one point. But yeah, when it comes to history, there is really a kind of argument when you're studying history that what they're teaching you is never really literally history. It's what you maybe closer define as historiography. You choose parts of history to form some kind of coherent narrative. The decisions of what you choose to discuss or what events you choose to highlight in history are always going to be politically informed, just as the things you choose not to discuss will be politically informed. You're always going to upset some people. So the fact that people are very upset about the 1619 project doesn't really bother me. There was an Atlantic article that said that most of the right-wing critics of the 1619 project actually agreed that slavery's legacy still shapes American life. The issue with the 1619 project, as was already mentioned, is that it was done by journalists, as well as it had to come from the New York Times, which kind of is a bit of an indicator of like part of the problem, really, that it had to come from the New York Times as opposed to historians or even like the state curriculum. So I think, just involving a very important part of history in the curriculum, I don't really see what the controversy is.
Thanks so much. Last but not least, following you.
All right, so my direct and immediate take on the 1619 project is it's just a simple attempt to blackwash the history of America. So America was established according to current historical studies about 180,000 years ago by Native Americans that crossed the Asian Pacific Bridge and came to America and established it, which means Asians effectively established America and then became over time Native Americans. And we've been enslaving people since we got here, and we enslaved people on the way here. And so to say that slavery started in 1619 when Virginia was established, when Native Americans were already in St. Augustine, Florida in 1492 is just completely attacking the entirety of the history of my entire people in this country since its inception, before white people even existed, to be quite frank. And so it's incredibly frustrating to continually hear the argument that my people don't matter in our own country that we established and built for fucking forever. But that's just my take.
Okay, all right, jump at it.
Okay, I want to just ask counterpoints about something, if I may.
Please.
Sure,
Look,
please.
I share your concern about essentializing people. I'm very much white people, black people, whatever, doesn't matter. Don't essentialize people. Now, I've looked at the 1690 project. Admittedly, I've not read every single word, but I didn't really get the impression that there was any essentializing of white people going on as innately evil or something like that. I was just wondering if you had a quote or something you could point to demonstrate that that is the case.
Yeah. So, for instance, it's oftentimes the application of the narratives themselves. For instance, so for instance, just to point out two inaccuracies that I've heard so far. I think it was in the initial chapter of the 1619 project. It was basically saying that without slavery or without the existence, without the transatlantic slave trade, America wouldn't exist. That's a super weird assertion. It's crazy weird considering the demographics, considering the land, considering what was going on in Europe at the time. It's a weird assertion. So basically what you're doing is you're rooting all of European American history in the desire to own other people. Now we can argue these historical facts, but I would say that would be a uniquely, it's not so much the statement, which I actually think is incorrect, but it's kind of what you extrapolate from the statement. Also,
it's your interpretation. Sorry. It's your interpretation of the statement rather than something in the actual text specifically.
Sure.
There's nothing in the text that says this is an essentialization of white people, or they're inherently evil or innately evil, because that's the claim you made.
Sure, but I'm on Twitter.com, so that's my mistake.
I mean, yeah, listen, we're going to find idiots on Twitter that say stupid stuff. Of course we are. And, listen, I get annoyed with it too. I know the person that wrote it can be frustrating and they've got bad takes, but I just want to clarify that the actual text itself within it doesn't contain specific passages or references that say that white people are innately evil or inherently evil.
Okay, but can I point out like another kind of like weird thing that I've heard in the past 5 minutes though? So for instance, like Dylan Burns asserting that like, well, American democracy didn't really start until the Civil War because we had slaves. So was Greek society? Yeah, what was Greek society not democracy because they owned a load of
Maybe like a
slaves?
pseudo democracy. Yeah, I would assert that if you are somebody who believes in democracy and saying that a society is a democracy, but this group or that group, the homos, the black people, the I don't care, it could be Sumerians for all I care, they can't be included, then I would say to say that your nation really started as a democracy, it feels a little slanted. For example, then you could start. Then the conversation gets confusing because okay, in a lot of ways, China is a democracy. In fact, it actually says in the Constitution that it is a democracy. And there is a lot of voting in China when it comes to state assemblies. And you just have to be a party official. If you're a party official, it's a democracy. And so it's really weird for us to assert that this or that or this is democracy when we're specifically not including massive amounts of people. You could say it's maybe a pseudo democracy, but it's hard to say it's a democracy.
Sure. And so this is where what I would want is instead of like a middle school teacher being like, hey, did you know America wasn't a democracy until 1866 because black people couldn't vote? Then like I would, and they were thought of as property. I would prefer if that was just like a conception. It was like, were we really, like, instead of a statement, make it a question. Were we really democratic
we're
until
like artificial
1866?
Crab, we're kind of a democracy. But are we really? It's like artificial crab a little bit.
But were we really a democracy until like 1922 or whatever the fuck we gave women the right to vote?
Yeah, the thing is, I can't give you a
I want to point this out.
We weren't a democracy then. That's the thing.
Okay,
we're not a democracy now.
What somebody is requesting for me is like what somebody wants is for the history textbooks us to be able to point to the state and say that's when everything got good. Or that's when everything was resolved and we were a democracy and everything great. I can't point to that date because that date doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, well, and let's be clear here. Like when we say like everything was good, even for like white people, it's like America was good for rich, powerful white people who had very idealistic ideas about what a society could be. And then we've kind of been chasing those ideas ever since. But if you looked at the 19th century, it wasn't a fucking picnic. Like nobody was having a good time. All right. So like let's be real there for a second.
I would say I would bring up felons today, for example.
1 second. I just want to point this out because I don't know if Prime's considered it in the past, so I want to speak to him directly. So white men thought more of black men than they did of women. So we gave black men the right to vote before we gave women the right to vote. So like history's fucked up and weird.
Hang on, but that's specifically because they refused fire duty. Women were given the right to vote on that, and they did vote on it. And women voted against having the right to vote because they voted against having the requirement of conducting fire duty, and that's a historical fact.
That's
Okay.
So I don't think somebody's ability to participate in democracy should be dependent on whether they pick up a gun or a fire hose or whatever the hell you're talking about. Because there's a lot of people who can't. So one group I'd point to is disabled people. So should disabled people be restricted from the vote because they can't fucking march on D-Day? Like what? Like that? I mean, really?
So
no, they're given exemptions because they're disabled and they physiologically can't.
So okay, hold on. I'm a little confused here, but that's okay. Well, counterpoints. I actually have considered that. That's pointed out to me literally in high school. That black men were allowed to vote before white women, and not surprising because like the original bigotry was against women, right? So that doesn't surprise me at all. And it's just but it is what it is. And then we had a black president, but we had a woman president, so black male president for a woman president. So but just for our so that you can educate us all, Falinor, could you explain this situation to us? So you're saying that at some point in history, there was a national vote where women were allowed to, they weren't allowed to vote previously, but now they're allowed to vote on whether they will be able to vote going forward. And then women,
State-based.
I guess white women probably, I'm assuming, voted that they would not want to vote because of having to take part in some sort of military
Get
duty.
lines, correct. Yeah.
When did this
So
happen?
wait,
So fire
so
duty
we
is
asked
in-
them to vote about whether they could vote.
No, they were given the opportunity to vote in exchange for being able to serve their country and more importantly, conduct fire duty. And women overwhelmingly chose not to deal with the extremely dangerous job of fighting a fire. The thing you have to realize is fighting a fire back in the day, when we're talking in the 1400s, 1500s, 1800s, was extremely dangerous. Your likelihood of being severely burned or killed was extremely likely versus today. You have to remember back then they weren't fighting it with fire hoses and fire retardant equipment. They were fighting it with buckets of water that were hand carried and handed off with lines of people from the local city wells.
So,
And so it was an extremely
sure.
dangerous
Could you tell us when this happened? Could you, so we want
The exact date, I'd have to look it up.
or like the name of this event or something, right? Like, was it before the country was
literally just
founded,
called
or like before
I think it
1776?
was prior. Yeah, like in the 1700s. Like I said, I'd have to pull up the resources that I found on it.
What does that have to do with afterwards? Like in terms of like the actual
Oh,
country?
you mean like women's
About
segregation?
America.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So continue on,
Yeah.
please.
Oh, no, you were
I just
talking earlier about like your people. I was trying to figure out what are your people, because I was very confused in your opening statement about like you're trying to do.
American.
Pardon?
I'm Native American.
Okay, like Elizabeth Warren math, Native
No,
American, or like
no, like my son's like 58% Native American.
like because
Native
because the woman that you've engaged in coitus is Native
No.
American.
No,
Asian
I'm a
coitus?
very brown person. You just can't see it because of the light.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
That would,
then
but that would make your son 50% if you're person you're
Yeah.
married.
Well,
Okay,
I'm
can we not
confident.
question the
Yeah, let's
fucking
not.
authenticity
No,
of people's
I
race,
was just
please?
trying to-
Come on, that's fucking outrageous.
no, I was just
Fuck
trying to
me.
figure.
That
I
is
was just
pretty
trying to
bad.
figure out what that was. Okay, so like then doesn't I guess it kind of leads back to that whole thing where like people are like Black Lives Matter is happening, but we get killed too. Okay, then then fight too. Like, well, don't be mad that the one group of people are going ahead and correcting part of the history. That means that you should also advocate for some form of history revision for like your party as well. Like it shouldn't be like either don't fix anything or like do everything all at once. Like I clearly like the 1619 project's objectives were not to go ahead and fix that, but that doesn't mean that like a Native American history cannot be included when we're talking about the brutality and like what Europeans had to go ahead and basically exploit to go ahead and build America. That means work for that
So-
too, but that doesn't
so
mean that we shouldn't.
Here's the issue, Katarana. Here's the issue, Katarana. So the Native Americans weren't treated. The Native Americans weren't treated like they should have been. Then when the Europeans came over, they also brought indentured servants, which are people that were slaves for a certain amount of years prior to being able to be citizens of the colonies. We can also talk about the Japanese who were held in internment camps during World War II. We could talk about how the Italians were treated when they came into the United States. We could talk about the Irish were treated when they came to the United States. Let's talk about history, okay? Let's talk about history in the schools, right? Let's talk about all those things. Let's talk about how Black people were enslaved up until the Civil War, and even past that, it was extremely racist in the South, and there was still terrible things being done. Let's talk facts, okay? But where I draw the line is where you're gonna say that America itself is inherently racist because it started when slavery started. So when you do that, you're equating America to slavery, okay? And that's not what America is. America was founded in 1776 when we declared independence from Great Britain. and it wasn't because we
but I
wanted to
think-
keep our slaves. You could argue the argument.
But I
ask you a
think it's
question?
a little
Hang
weird
on.
to
I
Wait,
would-
I think it's a little weird to even like compare what the Irish went through to like what Africans went through.
this
I'm
is
saying
my
no.
point.
So
It's
I'm
really
going.
strange.
So I'm going
These are
through.
not
I'm
on the
saying,
same
let's
level
talk,
at
well,
all.
No, I'm not saying they're the same level. What I am saying is let's talk about all the atrocities. Let's bring all the facts into history. Okay, let's talk historical facts,
What's wrong
right?
with that?
Hang on.
What's wrong
Yeah,
with
I
Hang on,
understand.
hang on. This is actually
that's a-
getting directly to my
Spartacus, can I jump in there? Spartacus, I
give
want to
me
ask,
one
do you?
second here. Give me one
Yeah, go
second.
ahead.
Here. This actually reflects directly my exact conversation. He said that America was established in 1776. Again, it completely erases 180,000 years of my people's history, where we built towering skyscrapers to literal
No, you
cities
didn't.
with millions of population.
Skyscrapers.
Yeah, we have skyscrapers like in the middle of jungles that they're still finding to this day.
They weren't skyscrapers. Like
Yeah,
don't
they
call
were.
them
They
sky-
were
they're
literally
impressive. Don't get me wrong. These are very impressive
I mean,
structures. They're not
these are-
skyscrapers.
These are
and
caveats
these
that we're
are-
landing on for no
Okay, yeah,
reason.
let's.
No. It's getting to
Just
my
one
point
Felino's
exactly,
point, 'cause, like,
which
it's
is
you trying to lump in like
19
indigenous American history with
No,
like
I'm-
United States history. These are really strange because
no.
these were like different tribes who had competing interests, different governmental styles, different cultures. Right? It doesn't make sense to say, oh, all these people were American, and that's when America started.
No,
It's
but
really
that's
strange.
exactly what we were. So you're saying that the indigenous people don't belong in their own country? This is exactly my point. Y'all are literally
not what I
saying
said.
that my people aren't Americans when we're called Native Americans.
Nobody said
This
that.
is my
When we say
problem.
when we say America, we're
You
referring
literally
to the United
just
States
said
of
it.
America.
I
We're
did?
referring- No,
Send
when
me
we
a
say
clip.
America, we're referring to this
Send me
flag.
$1,000.
We're not referring to the Aztecs, the Mayans. We're not referring to the Blackfeet. We're referring to this flag technically. I mean, I'm referring to this flag when I say America. So maybe I should be a little more specific and say United States of America.
Let's give.
But I'm referring to this flag.
Let's give Dylan a chance. Go ahead, Dylan.
How did we go from, hey, I'm uncomfortable with it saying 1916 is when slavery started, even though I'm pretty sure it's like from a black person's perspective, and the whole thing, as Counter brought up earlier, was like, hey, we're writing this in a different perspective, trying to give a different perspective. And you've brought that to nobody in this room is saying that Native Americans are even American. Nobody said that.
I think the kind of straw man that's being made is that like, oh, am I muted?
Oh, we can hear you.
No, we can hear you. Bud.
Unfortunately,
Oh, it
not.
says on my screen. Sorry. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that I think the kind of issue there is that I think is anyone saying that like 1619 Project was claiming to assert a certain gap in history? It wasn't saying that they were
So
doing
it-
all
it's-
the history.
It's a bit difficult. To be honest with you, they do make the claim that they want to reframe. Well, it's a difficult kind of language, right? They want to reframe the start of America as this date in 1619 when the first black slaves arrived in the US. They've later clarified and said, we don't mean to say, right, this is now the date, this is the foundational date, and that's it. It was more just start a conversation and generate a conversation. So, I will admit that I think initially maybe they were a bit overzealous in the way that they presented that and said, this is the date. But I think the idea is that it's just about starting a conversation rather than necessarily being, this is the date, that's it, no other date matters. And, obviously, I am sympathetic to Falinor's point, and I think one valid criticism is it does absolutely disregard and ignore the indigenous aspects of it. And I think the problem with saying, oh, well, do your own thing is that this is a journalistic project that was created by the New York Times. So it's like, okay, but then is there going to be a journalist who's going to come along and go, okay, well, let's do this for indigenous people now? It's kind of like a crapshoot, isn't it? And obviously, indigenous people don't necessarily have the greatest voice in the United States, but I'm sure Falinor can comment a bit further on that. But yeah, basically, I think that, whilst it's kind of tricky to just say, well, do your own thing, because it doesn't really work out like that in reality,
So Chud, the interesting thing about what you're saying is when you're saying that they came out and said that they were that the 1619 wasn't the actual founding date. That's not actually what they meant. It was just to bring up a topic. Actually, the fact of the matter is that these things were taken out of the original text without having amendments to them. There was no amendment saying we took this out because of this reason. They tried to hide it by taking it out because they realized it wasn't very popular. They realized that they weren't going to get very far with it. That was their original intent.
Sorry,
that was their original
wait,
intent
no. That's not true. It's not because because it wasn't
That is
popular.
true.
Okay, no, it's not true. Okay, so I will agree that the New York Times and the 1619 Project absolutely made mistakes in how they dealt with criticism and how they dealt with feedback, and they've made corrections. Okay, and I will admit that some of the corrections maybe haven't been public, but the idea they sneakily did it because it's not popular, they actually did respond to critique, and there was even a correction that they made in regards to the assertion that American independence was fought on the back of slavery. So there have been actual public corrections that they've made as well. They're not trying to do everything underhand.
After massive pushback, it took massive pushback for them,
Yeah,
to, for them
I
to come
agree.
out and admit they made these
They should have done it
corrections.
sooner. They should have done it sooner. I agree with that, and
But
that's
the only
fine.
reason they came out and admitted they made these
Sprouticus,
corrections is because of
that's-
massive pushback.
Sprouticus, your
What?
mic is a little fucked up. Could you fix it?
So I'll sit closer to it. Is that better?
Sprouticus, why did it take me calling you out for you to go and fix your mic? That's really fucked up. You should have fixed it before you came on the panel. Really irresponsible. Shows him to be a snake.
Okay. Okay. So what Dylan's trying to do is bring up that I didn't know my mic was fixed and I fixed it. Okay. What the difference between this and the 1619 project? The 1619 project is you're looking at facts and then they're making theories based off these facts. So the first black slave ship did come in 1619. That is a fact. But what isn't a fact is that the United States of America started in 1619, which is what they started off by saying. This was taken out trying to be underhandedly under the table. They tried to take this out. And then after massive pushback, they then admitted they took it out. There was no amendments like there usually is. There wasn't anything indicating that something was originally there, and it's not there now. Those weren't included, and they were trying to underhandedly take those out.
But
Actually, the online resource still has that original claim, so that's not true.
Wait.
Go ahead. Respond to it, Dylan, and then we'll go to counterpoints.
I want to see the original because I'm reading a lot of this right now, and a lot of this is completely unobjectable. Like definitely this section about like the actual 1619 date and what happened around this. Maybe there was a claim that and you can use this to make me look like an idiot. That's going to be like George Washington overthrew the British in 1619. But I'm pretty sure what it's going to be something along the lines of the foundations of what would become the United States was born in 1619 when in its relationship with black folk, and it's going to be probably something along the lines of that, and not like. Yeah, fucking George Bush fucking punched, I don't know, Saddam Hussein in 1619 and America was born, right? What is the actual, capture? I'm completely ignorant. You might make me look like a fucking prick right now. So, what is the actual section that was removed? I would like to see it.
Okay. Counterpoints.
Yeah, so while you guys research this was kind of my point where I think the aims can be noble while maybe the details need to be fleshed out. So for instance, there was some ahistorical perspectives when it came to the 1619 project. So for instance, if a teacher was to come out and say democracy didn't start until 1866 because there were people who couldn't vote in the United States, then I, as a student, because I was a fucking smartass, I would be like, this is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Greek democracy involves slaves. What the fuck are you talking about? Well, and there, instead of creating an opportunity for a conversation, what you've done is you basically entrenched somebody in thinking that you're being ideological about history. Same thing with fucking, I'm not done, bud.
Okay, I want to respond to this.
And you kind of fucked me up. No, I'm not. I said I'm not done. Okay, that doesn't mean interrupt
go on,
again.
I'll respond.
Holy shit.
Go.
Okay, thanks, buddy. I appreciate the permission. Yeah, I appreciate the permission to continue speaking. So if this was posited as a question, hey, here's some perspectives that are new and interesting and different and that you might have never considered before, I think that's a noble fucking goal. As a matter of fact, it's kind of like black representation in popular media. Because you know what fucking American history was in fucking 1992? American history was fucking Davy Crockett was the coolest fucking pioneer in history, and he wore a raccoon cap and he fought those fucking filthy Mexicans off. And there was no mention of the fact that the entire context of the fucking Mexican-American War was that Mexico didn't colonize its northern territories. Americans colonized those, getting dual citizenship with Mexico. And then the American government, the United States of America, basically seeing an opportunity for a land grab, said, hey, why don't you guys declare independence from Mexico, and then we'll help you take the territory. Now, that's broad swaths, but it's not Davy Crockett in a raccoon cap fighting off the fucking dirty Mexicans as an American hero. It's an American land grab against Mexico, which was not protecting its territory. That's where I'm thinking that like
Or
changing the perspectives of American narratives is important.
or also,
but we have to be
but
real about what
counterpoints.
happened.
Let me respond.
Hold on,
Let me
hold on.
respond.
Yeah,
let me
sure, sure.
respond.
And
Let
I
me
want you.
respond.
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. So I want you to do exactly that. But also changing that perspective, would be Texas and the anti-slavery laws in Mexico, and right, like that part was important. That's often left out.
Yeah.
That okay, great. So that
We
independence.
should,
had
yeah,
something
we
to
should
do-
probably talk about all that
Okay,
shit.
Just
let's
one
go.
thing
Let's go.
I'd
Let's
like
go
to
to
clarify
Chad.
here.
Chad.
Okay,
Can I-
right. I
can I
think the
just
problem
one
that's
thing?
happening here, counterpoints, is that what you're doing is you're looking at the text and you're extrapolating what's happening, but you're not evidencing that this is happening. So I don't actually know that there's teachers out there that are explicitly saying, "Oh, look, this is it. It happened in 1886." It's meant to be a resource to be used. And sure, if there are teachers out there that are just explicitly saying, "Oh, democracy didn't start till 1886," well, that's an issue with the teacher, and them not doing a very good job of teaching the resources. So yeah, I think that you've got this idea.
But don't you think we should hash out? This is something that Katarana said basically about like not authorial intent, but basically like credentials. Shouldn't we work out these kinks before they become a part of curricula, or should, like, I mean, if you want to bring it in,
Yeah, sure.
so for instance,
yeah.
in my curricula, okay, hold on. In my curriculum and in my academics, sometimes we would bring in an exterior source for consideration. Not for curricula, this is what happened, but for, hey, here's a weird fucking thing that we're going to bring in and then we're going to talk about it. That's how I think the 1619 project could be implemented in a really intelligent and interesting way. But if you want me to fucking go spend the next 20 minutes instead of talking, Googling has the fucking elementary school in Vosh's fucking community started beating up white children for the fucking 1619 project, I can spend the next fucking 20 minutes doing that if that's how you'd like me to spend my time.
No, sure. Listen,
can I step in?
I just want to quickly say, just one quick response to that. I just think that, like, I agree with you. I looked through a lesson plan earlier today and I was critical of some elements. I think they baked the premise into some of the activities they were doing. Sure, I think there's issues with it. And it seems to me like you think it's more of an amendment or adjusting it rather than like keeping it completely out of the classroom, maybe. I don't know your exact position. But I just don't like this idea that you're presenting that these teachers are taking these resources and teaching this word for word and that's it. And there's no, thought or process about it, when I think there probably is. Teachers are engaging with this and doing it in a way that, does it in a way that you're thinking of already. But,
So
I guess
I absolutely hope you're correct. Welcome to the center.
We'll go to Katarana. We'll go to Fallon, and then Spartacus. Okay.
Okay.
So it kind of seems, I don't know, a little bit, I guess, hopeful to be like, yeah, let's just go ahead, relook at this, and get this, rolled out once we have the full context of history. Unfortunately, somebody's always going to be left out, even if it were to be done by a commission of historians. There's always going to be a group of people that are going to be like, no, you forgot my part of history. Because at the end of the day, where is this going to go into curriculum? There's only so many days, and I think it's like 180 days or something that they spend per school year. They're not going to be able to cover it all. So I think it's better, even though it's incomplete, and I think we can all recognize as incomplete. It's always good to go ahead and try to make like little strides as you can. And I would definitely just go ahead and encourage like another group of people to go ahead and fill in some of the gaps for the Native American perspective. And then, there might be some type of gaps that need to be filled in for the East Asian perspective. But I don't think we need to sit here and just like sit on our hands until we finally get this ultimate amazing version of the 1619 project, because at the end of the day, people are still being educated under the American education system, and they're still getting a very, very inaccurate and incomplete version of history right now. So I'd rather them get a slightly less incomplete rather than totally incomplete.
Okay, so we'll move on. But I just to your point, Karana, like there is no complete version of history, right? Like no textbook, no nothing, no anything completes it. They show it from one perspective. Some of them pretend to be complete, but they just show it from one perspective to accomplish a goal. So I thought that was a really good point. All right, let's go to Falinor, then Sprout, Dylan, Sock, and Counter.
So one thing that I would like to add really quickly here is what Counterpoint pointed out and chat's been talking about, is Mexico invading America. That wasn't Mexico. The people that were in Mexico at the present time were natives. and the people that actually came up were actually the Spaniards. And so it was Spain, and Spain established America and Florida and St. Augustine in 1492 by sailing along the coasts after they conquered several cities and took lots of slaves and massacred lots of people. And then, ran along the coastline with a murder spree, setting up monasteries, and then finally establishing St. Augustine, Florida. So this is getting, again, to my point is there's a lot of facts in Native American history that are incredibly important that actually show how America was established, and what defined what America was, because there wouldn't be a United States of America if the natives hadn't stepped in and saved the settlers. There wouldn't be an America to begin with because nobody would have survived the first winter. Everybody would have starved to death, and there'd be another
Do
run
you
up.
think there weren't more white people coming?
It doesn't matter if there were more white people coming. After the first initial negative experience, they would have been massacred every time they came to the island.
No. Okay. This
What?
is ahistorical as
What are you
fuck.
talking about?
90% of Native Americans were killed by disease through exposure through the fucking Labrador fucking land bridge. There weren't that many fucking Native Americans fucking left, and you goddamn guarantee white people.
No,
This
that
can be a
was
little
over-
racist.
that was
Are
over
like
200 years
fucking
ago.
cockroaches. Will fucking
You're-
survive anything, dude.
You're
Fucking no.
mistaken,
Fuck that.
and that was over 200
There
years.
would be way more white people on the fucking way right after those fucking frozen corpses fucking
No, they
keeled
wouldn't,
over.
because after the first one would have been wiped out, they wouldn't have been recommissioned. Like that's
Well,
exactly.
okay,
You're in a
why
lot
do
of,
you? How could you possibly think that they would see this land full of indigenous people who do not have the technology to counter their militaries, right? Why wouldn't they just come back?
Because the Spaniards were already here.
Didn't
They
what
were
about
here
the Romans and
300 years
Germania?
before anybody else came.
And we
German-
wouldn't want to compete with the Spanish? What the fuck?
No, because at the time the Spanish, they didn't have the opportunity to establish America
my
at
God.
the time.
This is all
Fallenor just
hypothetical,
called
and I'm
all
sorry-
Brit bongers pussies, all right? That's what he just said.
Okay.
Oh my
so-
god.
It's
I take
mostly
issue
true.
with that, obviously.
So
Wait, no, fuck off, load of
Dylan-
books. Stand up for yourself.
So Dylan, have a quick response, and we got to go to Sprout. He's waiting patiently.
Okay, so this is all hypothetical. I don't think anyone in here really knows what would have happened, but the Romans tried to invade Germany many, many times and failed many, many times, but they didn't stop. They just kept trying until they had a somewhat successful invasion of Germania. I find it hard to believe that the European empires, always trying to outdo each other, would not have continued to attempt to do this upon failure until they succeeded, knowing that there's probably plentiful resources on the continent. Not to mention the fact, this is exactly what we did in Africa. What happened in Africa was, hey, we can't go into the mainland because disease kills us. And then as technology continued to increase, then the Europeans did the scramble for Africa. So I don't know. We have no clue what exactly would have happened, but I think saying that if this one historical event would have turned out differently, everything would be different, feels like a lot of like Wereboos talking about Stalingrad. Like if Germany captured Stalingrad, it would have been totally different. We have no clue.
Okay, let's go to Sprout. Then Dylan, if you have something else to say, maybe. Sock and then counter.
Okay, so I got my sources that Dylan wanted me to get. They're in the chat. First one is from the Quillette.com. From August 2019, the 1619 Project was posted as this. The 1619 Project is a major initiative from the New York Times observing the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. It aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding, and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are. This was objected by both the right and the left, that displacing 1776 as an alternate date. For several months, there was a fight between it. Nicole Hannah-Jones doubled down on the claim and said, "I argue that 1619 is our true founding." She tweeted the week after the project launched. Also look at my banner pic in my profile, which was a reference to a graphic. The date 1776 is a line.
Sounds
was
exactly
crossed
what I
out
thought
with
it
a
was
line.
going to be.
So
sorry, there's
No,
one quick
no,
thing I
they
want to
said
point
true
out. No,
founding. They
listen.
said- no, they
what
said
you
that-
just quoted is still on the fucking website. I'll read it
They
here
said-
from
no,
the
they
website, the
said-
Pulitzer
they said true
Center.
founding.
No, what you just said, it says it.
I can't-
1919 Project, inaugurated with special issue New York Times, challenges us to reframe U.S. history by marking the year when the first enslaved Africans arrived on Virginia soil as a nation's foundational date. It still says it on the website.
Do I get my
So the
time?
idea that
Can I reclaim my time?
it says it on the fucking website though. You're
So
saying
go
it
ahead.
disappeared,
Go
but
ahead.
it's still there.
Go ahead,
All right, I'm
Sprout.
reclaiming my
It's
time.
fucking bullshit.
But-
It's
so-
bullshit. bullshit.
It's not bullshit. So, throughout the controversy, the line about the 1619 being the true founding continued to haunt the Times. This criticism did not aim to denigrate the project's titular date or the associated events of history of slavery. Rather, the passage came to symbolize the Times' blurring of historical analysis with editorial hyperbole. The announced intention of reframing the country's origins date struck many readers across the political spectrum as an implicit repudiation of the American Revolution and its underlying principles. Rather than address this controversy directly, the Times, it now appears, decided to send it down the memory hole, the euphemized term for selectively editing inconvenient passages out of old newspaper reports in the George Orwell's
How much of this are you going to read to us?
novel, give me a second, novel 1984, without announcement or correction. It then goes into a September 18, 2020, same picture, everything else except it says this. The 1619 Project is an ongoing initiative with the New York Times Magazine that began August 2019, the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. It aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. Read more about the 1619 Project. So they completely edited out. It was the same picture. They just edited it out. There was no kind of like asterisk saying that it was edited. The New York Times decided to send it down the memory hole and decided it never happened.
Okay, can I respond to that? That was all
Dylan.
directed at me.
Please, Dylan.
Okay, so what I said was I doubt it's going to be something that is like George Washington founded America at that date, or George Bush killed Saddam Hussein at that date. That is most likely going to be talking about the foundations of American racism and slavery were started at that date. And it sounds just about what that exactly said. The word you're caught up on is true founding, but that's about exactly the analysis I gave. So since he read a lot of stuff that didn't expand on anybody's education here, I'm going to just read this. Do you like green eggs and ham? I do not like that, Sam I am. I do not like green eggs and ham. Would you like them here or there? I would not like them here or there. I would not like them anywhere.
Okay, goddamn it!
Okay.
So,
What?
true founding would indicate that the United States of America was started then. That is the indication. That is the implicit indication of what that says.
Listen,
you can't
as
argue.
you
Founding
know,
means this is where we
interpretation.
derive from, right?
It's your
It's a true founding.
interpretation.
True founding is 1776. That's
It's
the
your
true founding of the
interpretation, and
United States of America.
that's a bullshit statement as well. If you take issue
It's
with
not
the
a
founding of it
bullshit
being
statement.
that
The
day.
Declaration
Yes,
of
it
Independence
is. You're
is
full of
when the
shit.
world
You're
recognizes
exciting
it.
fucking
So,
post-millennial. You're right-old fever dream bullshit. Shut the fuck
The
up.
whole world recognizes the United States of America started in 1776
Okay.
when we write the Declaration of Independence, telling Britain we were independent.
Spartacus. Could it be that maybe you're taking a too literal reading of this, right? Maybe
What's
that,
not literal in
hold
history?
on. Oh my god. That this is when they say true, right? True. What they're actually saying is that the concepts, right, and the systems that continue on, right, starting with like black slavery, continue on, echoed throughout time, right, starting at that point when in 1619, right, and echo throughout time, and then saying that okay, I looking at this wide span of history, that this point is where I feel is the symbolic start of the founding of America, right? We can understand that, yes, a bunch of white men later on, 1776, decided, okay, no, this is the date, we're doing it, go Team America, right? But saying that, okay, but before then, we can see systems used up till 76 and beyond that might indicate that are still resonate in America. Does that make sense to you?
That's like arguing that the date that the PS1 came out is the true founding of the PS4.
Hang on, but no. But here's my more
Yes.
fundamental
Giga brain take.
Yes.
Here's my one fundamental issue with that is the Spaniards brought African slaves with them when they started to establish St. Augustine, Florida in 1492. So even with that logic, African American slavery existed in America prior to 1619, which is one of my fundamental issues with the 1619 Project. It doesn't even accurately reflect African American slavery, much like
could it
slavery
be
at all.
that
But nobody cares about
Wait,
Spanish people.
yeah,
Come on,
yeah.
let's be real.
Could it
Wait a second. Okay, so the thing is, that would be like me saying like true settlement of America started with the Vikings came. Like, but that would be incorrect because nothing really came of that. And so when you talk about that, did that develop like the transatlantic slave trade, which would be the defining characteristic of how black people were treated in America up until 1865 and beyond? So I think it could be a cool tidbit of knowledge, but it's not like the starting point of like the race.
Yeah, it's not the
go,
institution.
you know.
Let's go to Sock.
Yeah.
Sock counter Doobie.
All right. So this whole conversation is supposed to be about the 1619 Project in education, correct? And we keep going off on these tangents of when was America founded? Whether was it 1619 or was it 1776? You know, like in history class, like in high school, right? I wasn't taught, you know, the details of the slave trade. I wasn't taught, you know, the effects of slavery in society before we were independent, right? And I think like we can all probably find something in the 1619 Project that we would probably agree with, and that would probably expand our context, right, in like education, right? That would be good. It would like shed more light on like what our history was. Now, am I saying that the whole thing is perfect and like there's no contention? No, but I'm sure we could probably find some things, right, that we would agree with, and like talking more about the slave trade that happened, or like the chattel slavery, right? I hadn't heard that term before I read the 1619 Project. So like there is some benefits, but you know, Sproticus, like the points you're bringing up, like do make sense as well, right? Like we don't want to just assume, well, like state as fact that in 1619 that's when America was founded, right? So I think, believe it or not, the centrist argument might be the best argument here, right? There's some things that are good and some things that are bad.
So that's
Listen,
what
I'll
I've been
that-
saying,
no
Sock. That's what I've been saying.
problem.
Is
Let's
what
do
I've been
it.
saying is let's talk about the facts, and let's talk about the actual facts, right? Let's talk about when the first slave ship came to America. Let's put that in schools, and that's what I've been saying. But let's not put the part of the 1619 Project where they say that the true founding of America is the United States of America is 1619, because that's just factually inaccurate.
Well, sure, but
you said they took it out. You said they took it out, so there's no problem.
Yeah,
no, the New York Times took it out and didn't.
Well, then they've took it out, haven't they? So what's the problem? It should be fine with you.
So Sprout, I guess like
there's a lot more things
wanna,
wrong with it than that.
You know, like me as like a peaceful centrist, like I want everyone to find common ground and let's find real solutions to this, right? Like I want, like, would you agree that it would be a good idea to kind of explore chattel slavery and the slave trade, right? Would it be good to kind of introduce that into like the curriculum throughout education?
Wait, this is
yes,
okay. This is weird.
I think it'd be good to teach kids about what happened. Yes, I think it's good to teach kids about what happened because it makes sure it never happens again. If you don't learn history, you're doomed to repeat it. So yes, I think the kids should learn everything that the United States of America did that was absolutely terrible. I think they should also learn everything that the United States did that was absolutely great. And we can move forward with those facts. But what we're not going to do is introduce historical theory into impressionable kids.
Well, the thing is,
wait, hold on.
The
Can I just say,
system
go ahead,
already
Darren.
does jerk off like the states. The education system already does talk about all the good things that the states have done. So that's why we didn't need to go through and have a commission like the 1776 commission, because it was completely unnecessary. Our education system already beats the ding dong of America so hard that I'm pretty sure I still have residuals of all of it all over my body.
I'm not pro the 1776 commission. All I'm saying is let's not introduce historical theory. Instead, let's introduce historical facts. History books should be about the facts, not the theories.
Well, that's why I said that
that's not how history is taught.
Well, I already had stated that my problems with this was the fact that like it was done by journalists as opposed to historians. I don't think that like I haven't gone through and read the entire the 1619 Project like text. So I'm not sure exactly like where might they be a bit wrong, where might they be really correct. But at the end of the day, like I still think that no matter what, this is something that was beneficial to go ahead and at least just introduce the fact that like America wasn't just super poggers the entire time, and that people have had like negative consequences and things like that's how people understand more about systemic racism. And we don't have conversations like, what do you mean? Like you guys aren't at the same point? Maybe it's just because your group is lazy. Like
I mean-
no, like
I mean,
let's
yes,
go
let's-
through and
le-
actually explain these.
let-
Let's talk about that. Let's also talk. I mean, let's also talk about redlining. That's not taught in schools right now. Let's talk about how the United States
Yes, it
redlined.
fucking is.
Redlined.
Oh my
Let's put that in
I-
schools. But what we're not,
yeah,
what I want
that
to put in
sounds-
schools is historical theory, right?
A
That's,
red
but
line
why
sounds
can't we
like a
agree?
great thing to go ahead and put in. And and if we should go ahead and talk about this, the fact that this is something that I have to learn about on YouTube and through like leftist people rather than just school is already a problem. So it just seems like at the end of the day, we need to work on these.
Let's give Doobie a try, then we'll go to counterpoints.
Yeah, so before I get to my actual point, I just want to say that people who say that these things aren't taught in school, you're not taught about chattel slavery or redlining or the effects of slavery pre the revolution. That is insane to me. I went to like 3 different high schools. They were all shit public high schools. I learned about all these things. I learned about this shit in middle school. Right. So maybe you guys just weren't fucking paying attention, because I'm more than sure, right? More than certain that these things are absolutely taught in schools. Wait.
Let me
Hold on.
finish.
Now, it might be that they're not taught to the extent, they don't get into detail as much as some people would like. Maybe that's the case, right? But to say that they're just not taught at all is, I think, dishonest. Secondly, I'm going to leave the historiography thing alone because I don't feel like getting into it. But I think that we need to talk about, like, so the goal of this project, I mean, their stated goal, right, is to recenter the American narrative, right? The American mythos, the grand experiment shit, right? You know, people, the great American experiment. Can men govern themselves? You know, all this kind of shit, to recenter that narrative that's focused on like American exceptionalism and this liberty and freedom, all this nonsense. And rather than having slavery as like the original sin, of this American experiment, to make it the center, to make it the focus of this experiment, and to make the experiences and the contributions of Black people throughout American history the center, right? So initially, rather than starting off with this grand American experiment, it's the failure of the experiment. These ideals were not being satisfied, right? And that Black people struggled to satisfy them, to force the country to meet those ideals, right? Do any of you have an issue with that? Do you think that that would be an okay thing to recenter the narrative around?
I think it's okay with using it as an alternative perspective. I wouldn't want it to be the centered narrative.
Well, see, I'd agree with that. But I think that, like, just saying that, because this stuff is being taught in schools, not a lot of schools. They I think the 1619 Project, they put out like a lesson plan and like a reading guidelines to I think like a couple thousand schools in the United States so far, to kind of like do this, right? To kind of reshape the narrative, focusing on the Black experience and slavery as like the foundational, I don't want to say like foundational principle, but like the sin that all these other things came out of, right? Redlining, Jim Crow, all this shit, right? Our prison system, traffic, universal health, our lack of universal health care, all this stuff came from this original decision in 1619 to bring these slaves into the country, right? Onto the land. Like, there was no country, I guess, in technically. Right? So I think that's what they're trying to do. And I don't think I agree with Connor. I don't think I'd want it to be like the central focus, but I think it's fine to bring some of that in and to focus on it more, right? If people are just in here saying that redlining and all these things just aren't taught, like, that's insane to me. But if that's the case, obviously you guys either weren't paying attention or they didn't focus on it enough for you to remember it. So maybe they should.
Counterpoints.
I'm sorry, it's really, really broad to go ahead and expect that, like, just because your education system covered it means that everybody else's education system did. Like, not all of us were raised in the same state. Every state has different education
Yeah, I was
systems.
about to say, Juby,
So-
aren't you West Coast?
Yeah, I mean, the high schools that I went to were in LA, Pomona, and Oceanside.
Yeah,
Yeah, bro.
yeah. So, like, that's that's ludicrous. to
I
say that
doubt it's
just
brought up in
because-
Kentucky.
Okay, we don't have to focus on that. That's fine. I mean, just sure. He learned it. Other people didn't. All right, fair enough. All right, counterpoints.
Wait, can I just ask?
Sorry.
I
Not
make a
putting
point
it in
about
every.
all right, so
Everybody's in different educations.
okay. All right.
I'd like to jump in after counterpoints.
So Doobie, counterpoints, and then Talon and Dylan. Okay.
I was just going to ask counterpoints if he, growing up in Kentucky, if he learned about these things, but I don't think it really matters, to be honest with you. I think Colorado's point was fair. I learned it. Maybe other people don't. Right?
Okay.
That's a fair point.
Okay.
That's it.
Sure. All right. Well, then counter, Fowler, and then Dylan.
No, I'm an interesting bitch. I was raised in the French private school system. So I was taught that America was evil since the inception. So, I learned all sorts of crazy shit. But I think it needs to be remarked that we have all been cucked by Italians. Amerigo Vespucci was an Italian cartographer who joined some Spanish expeditions, and now we're all on his fucking cucked goddamn land. So we fucked up there. Clearly, the original sin wasn't slavery. It was being founded and named after Italians. Memes aside, facts are political. This is something that I want the right wing to learn. It's something that lefties have brought up repeatedly. The facts that you choose to present are political. The facts that you choose not to present are political. So there's no apolitical history. Every single thing that you present is going to be narrativized to people. And one of the reason why I said that I don't want the 1619 Project to be the central thesis of American history is because we need to create, even if we integrate alternative perspectives, history is a propagandistic tool to create a common body of a nation. So you need to have a narrative that brings people together. Now, the narrative can be that Connor's honky ass fucking grandparents fucked over fucking Prime's grandparents in a most un-Chad-like move, but now Prime and Counter are trying to fucking vibe going forward. All right, that could be the fucking narrative. But we have to address all our bullshit. And if there's things that from the alternative perspective haven't been addressed, whether we're talking about like Native Americans, Black people, Hispanic Americans, all that kind of stuff, if there are historical wrongs that haven't been addressed from that perspective, then us as honkies can't just say, oh, their perspective doesn't matter. Because guess what? They're citizens. They're in the same country. They're just as much citizens as we are. So we have to figure out the things that we have to address in order to actually make people feel like they're an equal part of the country, or else we're failing the ideals that we supposedly set in 1776. And then also, just to bring this up, Doobie, I think you're right in some ways that like slavery is obviously talked about in American schools. But the reason why people bring up like indentured servitude is to say that like not all white people were fucking sitting on like plantation steps sipping lemonade while all the Black people were working. White people were fucked over too. But then you have to bring up the very specific moral wrong of chattel slavery, where it's basically like you can't escape it. There's no escaping. Even Greek city-states had slavery that you could escape, except for the Spartans. So chattel slavery in particular actually is a fair, like, and even Islam, we bring up modern slavery in Islamic countries where basically West Africans are purchased and used as like, handmaids and wet nurses and all that kind of stuff. They are slaves, but guess what? If they convert, they can fucking leave. Slavery is a fairly unique historical wrong. And I think that needs to be addressed. Yield.
Okay, let's go.
I don't think that.
Sorry, you can respond to that, and then we'll go.
Yeah, I was just saying. I don't think it's true that it's that unique. I think that there were throughout history, all over the planet, plenty of other systems of slavery that children were born into after their parents were enslaved. You had you brought up Muslim slavery. You had African males castrated. Right, these people were not let out of slavery even after they converted. So yeah, I agree that it's like
evil is a spectrum,
but it's not. Yeah, but I don't think it's that unique in just like in human history.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, we can talk about the spectrum of evil another time.
I just don't think that this idea that it's like this, the 1619 Project is central to history and central. I just don't think that's true. I think it's another resource that teachers can use. I don't think there's, to my knowledge, any impetus or any like significant pressure politically. I mean, certainly not in Republican-led areas. To put this on the curriculum as you must learn about CRT on the brain. You must. It's the same thing basically. You must learn about the 1619 Project. You've got to read these documents and this is what you must now believe. I think it's just another frame of analysis to, start a conversation in the curriculum and start a conversation in the schools. I think this framing of it is an essential thing and they're trying to twist it to be this is now the history. I just think that's completely false. And yeah,
that was a hypothetical. That was a
to
hypothetical that Doobie asked.
So to what Counterpoint said.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, fair enough. But yeah.
So to what Counterpoint said, he's talking about how facts are political. Yes, facts are political, and that's why I've tried to leave political out of what I was saying. I'm saying let's talk about historical facts. Let's talk about instead of bringing in historical theory. And we can bring up the facts. We can bring up how it was wrong. We should never do it again. We like we do.
But those are moral assertions.
We talk about World War II. We talk about World War II, right? And so we talk about what happened in World War II. We talk about the Holocaust. It needs to be historical facts, not historical theory.
Can I make it a point
even
to that,
what
please?
you just said, sorry, just really quickly. I'll be very quick. You made moral assertions about facts, and you are basically combining 3 or 4 different fields right in the sentence that you said. Like
we have a set of morals in the United States.
Sure.
Okay.
Can I answer the point about?
Go ahead. Since you haven't said anything in a while, then go to Fallon.
Yeah. So that point about let's just talk about facts and not theory. I don't know if you're meaning to suggest a completely revolutionary perspective on history, but that is what you're doing, because the facts you choose to talk about, and Counterpoint's already mentioned this, are political, are part of theory. For example, when I was taught as a wee nipper about Henry VIII and his 6 wives for like a month,
Wait, can you say that?
Every fact they told us could have been true, probably was. But the fact that they chose to tell us that for an entire month was historical theory. It was backed by the historical theory that what some fat king did in his bedroom was more important than what was than other things in the time. Even with a particular event, you can do World War I. If you teach it from the perspective of fallouts between different state leaders, or from the perspective of different economic interests, then you're taking the same thing and it's both facts, but they're wildly different perspectives. I feel like this thing about the 1619 project is just being like a separate, like a focus on Black history in America. Well, don't like quite a lot of humanities disciplines already do that? Like psychology, you're taught 5 approaches: humanist, cognitive behavioral, etc. And no scholar in those, even though a scholar in one approach like behavioral might just only study behavioral, that doesn't mean they're implicitly rejecting all the other 4 ones. That's just what they're focusing on. So the 1619 project and that perspective is one perspective of history. You said that yourself, Sprout, because when you were talking about, let's talk about the plight of the Italians or the Native Americans. Well, yes, I applaud you for pushing forward the need for intersectionality in history.
Like Spartacus, would you have an issue with this just being like one of the frames through which history is interpreted in these classrooms? So they're not saying, "Hey, this is the frame," but this is one of the lenses that you can look at our history.
I wouldn't have an issue with that.
Okay.
But to use it as the main frame and to say this is the way we're going to look at history in this class, then
which is not, by the way.
Is anyone saying it should be the main perspective in this panel? By the way, is anyone here saying it should be the main perspective?
No, and it's not taught as that. It's not supposed to be that. It's a falsity based on, you know, whatever fucking bullshit Spartacus is reading. What was it, post millennial and all that trash?
Let's go to Fallon, then Dylan.
So I actually agree with Lonerbox on this one. I'm actually all for having some concept of the 619, assuming its inaccuracies are corrected, to where it teaches the intersectionality of the multiple races and cultures coming together in America, because that's the true founding of what America really is. It's a melting pot of a combination of many cultures brought together on one land to collectively create a nation. And so I'm actually all for that. What I am not for, though, is politicization of history, or the attempts to manipulate or bastardize it for some form of political or financial gain, which my tingling is it's for financial gains. The concept being, what it seems like is they're looking to dramatically shift not just the perspective of there was slavery in America, but how unbearably horrible, horrendously bad juju stuff it was, particularly just for African Americans, ignoring the 180,000 years of slavery in America, specifically for the construct of reparations, which is almost historically always left out Native Americans in terms of slavery reparations. And so, again, that's why I'm against it. I am absolutely for intersectionality and giving the true historical facts going back to the very beginning. which should include 1492 forward at a minimum. I think that it's unfair to take away over 100+ years of African American in slavery. 200 is just unfathomable to me. To ignore all of that and say 1619 was the beginning of it all, because that was 150+ years of cruelty, making them march across God-given deserts and unbearable forests conditions to then establish monasteries and unfathomable conditions to then build St. Augustine in 1492 with Native American slaves as well. And I feel like it's a cruelty to leave it out for either culture.
Okay, Dylan, and then Counter.
Sorry, I just had a stroke. So bad juju is one way to describe slavery. I will certainly say that is one way to describe it. Now, I also propose something that will work, I think, hand in hand with Fallen Norse Project. It's going to be the German History Project. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, man, it's crazy. America, Germany founded in 1871. There was this thing called the North German Confederate. Now, that's not the truth or any of the. And then a lot of people came together, did a lot of things, a lot of unity, and now Germany is a country in 2021. Now, there's some stuff that happened in the middle, right? But I don't want to get political about it. I don't want to say like political statements like Holocaust bad, which is political, or the perspectives I show, which would be inherently political. Like if I show the perspective of Holocaust survivors, that would be political. Because what I am saying with that is that this person's perspective is more important than Hans fucking the Butcher, who flourished under the German economy, right? So, we can't do that. And it's going to be an amazing project. It's going to be super successful. And it's crazy how now all these German kids, after the implementation of this project, don't seem to know a lot of facts about their history. I think that due to our education system in America, we only have a certain amount of time to teach kids things, and it's kind of screwed. I think the first step for any big teaching program is to, number one, lower classroom sizes so we can actually teach them the history. But I never thought the 1619 project was a project dedicated to talking about the struggles of every single community. Because you know what I could do? I could stand up and say, there's not enough queer stuff in this. There's not enough stuff about the oppression of, I don't know, the furries, right? I could go through any community on Earth and say there's not enough about it. This was particularly about the relationship of Black people with America. If you want to do your own project that is about the struggle of Native Americans, you're freely able to do that, and I encourage you to do that because we have screwed them over as well. But I think that a bunch of primarily Black authors getting together to talk about their experience, if we make all these projects have to include the stories of literally everyone, we're going to dilute the message.
So,
Listen.
hold on. So there's there's three people who object to the 1619 project here, right? And they object for different reasons. Now, Dylan did an excellent job of talking about Fowler's specific disagreement, objections, right? That the 1619 project doesn't literally include every narrative that had anything tangentially to do with the founding of this country, right? So the Native American story is absolutely important. It's 100% important. But like Fowler, you can understand though that even in textbooks, right, that they don't actually cover everything, right? Like even just general textbooks that we've been using for decades don't cover everything. In fact, they leave out Native Americans basically, right? They leave out. They'll have some pages on the civil rights and slavery, but then that's it, right? And then they leave out the struggles of so many. Like the Asian Americans are just completely cut out. They don't even why even bother. They're completely pushed out of the narrative altogether, right? So we can understand that each telling of history, right? And it doesn't have to be for malicious reasons, but each telling cuts others out, right? And it's important that these groups tell their own stories. So that's the one thing, right? And then Sprouticus, you seem to be upset because they use the word symbolic. Use the word true rather than symbolic. The true founding of America rather than the symbolic founding of America, even though it seems to be exactly what they were implying, like again Dylan was talking about previously, right?
That's not what they're implying.
No,
though.
that's exactly what they're implying. That's literally exactly what they're implying. That's literally exactly what they're implying, right? Like there is no foundational documents let's say it starts in 1619, right? There's none. That's not a thing. I'm not saying there's any but like I've been telling you previously, it's those systems that the results of which echo throughout time, right? The decision to bring in those African slaves and the organization and organizational structures that sprout up from that echo throughout time, echo throughout American history till this very moment, right? So that's what they were implying. So like, if you didn't get that, that's okay, right? Maybe that was confusing, maybe that was a poor choice of words, but that's literally what they're saying. That's absolutely what they're saying. So that was, and then of course, this idea of historical facts, all of them are political. Like the fact that, like I was saying with Eleanor, that Asian Americans aren't included, that's a political decision, right? Saying that they aren't important. And when they are, certainly they are. Not including Native American history, and I'm talking about just general textbooks, it's a political decision. It's a political decision, and no matter what story, what telling, right? All that matters. What you leave in, what you take out. So to say that we want just historical facts, well, unless you literally give a TikTok of every second and every action that was taken during an event, then you're leaving something out. You're making a decision, right? And that will have consequences to how people look at it. And then there's Connor, who says, we need history to bring us together, which, why? Why is that an important thing? And you can respond. I know you're bursting at the seams. But why is that important that we respond to, we necessarily bring us together? Isn't history simply be accurate and add valuable context? Because to bring there are some groups in America, right, who desperately hate the fact that we teach anything at all about the struggles of minorities within our nation, right? That they want to cut that out completely. So how do we bring together those people, right? When they say teaching about slavery, right, or teaching about American butchery in South America or anything like that is literally un-American. It shouldn't be included at all, right? It goes against the very founding. It violates the values of our country, right? Saying any bad words at all about the founding fathers is un-American. How do you reconcile those things? Instead, rather than reconcile those things, simply have a history that is as accurate as can be, which it'll never be 100% accurate, and adds context, right? Like adds valuable context to the narrative that we're always building because we're always learning. So, go ahead.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Can I just ask
sorry.
Fallen a question real
hang on.
quickly?
Go
Okay.
go
So
ahead.
Fallen, I'm just trying to understand your objection here because nobody here disagrees, right? That indigenous struggles, whatever, should be they should be given extra attention, right, in the American classroom. But you seem really like honed in on this as if we shouldn't do the 1619 project then, because that
No,
it's not okay. Well, then what's your issue? Because it seems like what you've been
So,
doing for
my
the last
issue
45 minutes is
my
responding with it, but it's akin to saying like all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter, or when someone brings up like police brutality, say, oh God, what about the crime rate in Chicago? Like what actual issue do you have with this
What
project?
about the
again,
crime
like I
in
said
Chicago?
earlier, my issue with the 1619 project is it effectively erases African American slavery history in America prior to 1619. And if the construct of the 1619 project at its core, the fundamental, is to reflect Native American and or African American or slavery in general, whatever their topic may be, it needs to be inclusive of the entirety of the history
What
and
should
not
it have
lop
included?
off a large piece of it and simply say, oh, well, this previously didn't matter. Because to me, what that says is African Americans prior to 1619, oh, well, your slavery didn't matter. Oh, well, your people being enslaved
It's
didn't matter.
because it was done, dude. I can answer this question.
Yeah,
I can
and
answer
that's
this
where
question.
I have an issue
It's
with.
okay. So I'm just gonna jump into my fucking point because you've said it a few times and I feel like nobody's addressed it. Okay. So the reason why it specifically matters is because we're talking about two different colonial civilizations. We're talking about a Spanish colonial civilization and we're talking about an Anglo-colonial civilization. Everybody here, the reason why we speak English is because we are all products of the Anglo-colonial civilization. And on top of that, the Anglo-colonial civilization, if you extend it into American imperialism, is literally like it's the lingua franca, it's the most dominant GDP, it's the most dominant culture on the planet right now. It makes sense to go through the Anglo civilizational arc. Now, maybe there's something to be said for the fact that we need to acknowledge like Spanish colonialism, Spanish slavery, Spanish genocide of the Native Americans, all that kind of stuff as like a parallel society, a parallel European colonial society. But the reason why the Anglo narrative was chosen specifically, my inference, is that we live in an Anglo society. When we like, if we were to bring up Spanish colonial genocide, then what Anglos can do, including me, a Celt, who is, I'm a victim of the Anglos too, guys. So what you can do is you can say, well, Europeans were doing it in general. Europeans were fucking over other Europeans. Europeans were fucking over, like Spanish people were doing it in general. We don't have to analyze the crimes of American society because it turns out that just everybody is bad. And then you kind of blunt the historical analysis that would allow us to understand each other and maybe move forward as an Anglo-based colonial civilization. This tangents right into Prime's question: why should history bring us together? Shouldn't it just be more about like accuracy? Shouldn't it be more about facts? And no, because what's going to happen is you asked a second very important question, which was how do we bring together people who don't want to learn about the bad parts of their history? We bully them. We bully them endlessly in order to bring them into the fold, because the other option is you have an extremely like anti-American social history that is like America's bad, it's evil, it's uniquely bad and evil. We need to destroy society.
You're redefining what it means to bring
I'm not done yet.
No. I just want to understand.
I'm not done yet.
You're just redefining what it means to bring people together. So bullying people is bringing to. If that's what you mean, that's okay. Then I drop my objection. If you mean bullying is bringing people together, I just want to. All right, go ahead.
If we bring them together into the same narrative through bullying, then yes, we're still bringing them together. There can be negative and positive social pressure to cultural movements.
Yeah, but that's again getting to the core of my point. This isn't Anglo versus Spaniard. This is African American slavery history in the Americas. This is what the 1619 Project is about.
No, it's not. It is not about.
But
it is not about African
chose
American slavery
Anglo.
specifically. Yeah, it's not about African American slavery specifically. It's about the founding of the United States and the principles that led to all the other shit, right? This is why they say the founding of the country was 1619, because, like I said earlier, the decision to allow the slave ship onto that coast, right, to allow the slaves into the country, was like led to a domino effect throughout the history of this country of Jim Crow, redlining, the Civil War, all these things. From their perspective, came from that moment, right? That decision.
Again, that's
right?
so
it is. Wait, but it is not. Wait, hold on. But it is not. It is not centered on African slavery in general. It is specifically talking about the project that became the United States.
But using that theory, you could easily say that Eve eating the apple, if you follow Christian theology, you could say Eve eating the apple is the founding of America, because you can go as far back as you want to if you're talking about building blocks, right? You can say Greek. You can say the founding of Greece was the founding of America. You can go as far back as you want to and just decide whatever event. Yeah, the Big Bang was the founding of America. It's a fundamental building block. Okay.
This is a hyperbolization and a half, though. Like, you do recognize that, like,
I'm going far to prove a point.
I know, but I just don't entirely agree with the point, because the whole point about going ahead and saying that America's founding could be qualified as starting in 1619 is because people were starting to accumulate wealth for the purpose of this country in particular as of 1619.
It was actually for the purpose of British colonies at the time.
Yes, but like British colonies are able to go ahead and like create some of the wealth that they have as a result of slavery. And there's a lot of things that in general that people wouldn't have had time to do if it wasn't for the fact that they had slaves to go ahead and execute most of the labor for them. So like when it comes to things such as Thomas Jefferson's ideas, the reason why he had so much time to go ahead and ponder on his ideas in the first place is because he had over 600 people making money for him, which he didn't have to pay. So like that's why we can go ahead and say, hey, the founding of our country is very much intrinsically linked with slavery, because slaves are the thing that were able to go ahead and prop up the country in the first place and create the capital that the country needed.
Mm-hmm. And you guys, you know this is how like aristocrats like conceptualize themselves as like an upper class of people, right? Is that they're not wages. They don't have to waste a third of their life doing labor. They can just profit off of your labor and then do whatever the fuck they want. Now, normally that's maintain wealth and run a business, but simultaneously sometimes it's just read philosophy, jerk off, and do ecstasy and abuse the Spain. So, you know.
Damn, bit of a Marxist take coming out. I like it.
No, that doesn't mean we abolish the ownership class or decommodify the basic human necessity. It's just an analysis.
So just to bring this up, within the British colonies, at no time did more than 45% of the colonists support the war, and only about a third fought for the war. So if you're gonna say it's a fundamental it's a fundamental brick at the very beginning of America's existence, or the United States of America's existence, right? Only 45% of British colonists actually supported the American Revolution. There was a certain percentage that just didn't fight against it, right? And then only about a third of the colonists actually fought for the American Revolution.
Okay.
These are facts.
2/3.
I'm a little confused as to how this is relevant to the topic at hand, like at all.
Well, what I'm saying is
because what he's trying to prove, what he's trying to say is that, look, well, you're saying that that they had slavery and all that. Well, most of the people fighting in the American Revolution were not most of the population. I don't like, but you want to know what? A lot of them holding guns supported slaves. A lot of their financial backers supported owning slaves.
And a lot of people who didn't own guns supported slaves.
Some actually, if you were a black soldier during the American Revolution, you'd be doing much better serving the British. Anyway, the thing is, there was even some who backed the American Revolution, particularly because of the issue of slavery, particularly because they were scared about how the British were treating slavery at home and how they might treat it abroad. And there's also the fact that once everything was said and done, two-thirds, that was a thing that we did. If you look at the fundamental foundation of the government that came out of that, slavery was enshrined. It was protected. So if you want to be
hold on, did you mean 3/5?
Yeah, 3/5. Sorry, 2/3. Why was I saying 2/3? 3/5. I was giving them more credit than they deserved. 3/5. So if you're trying to make the point that well, the revolutionaries weren't pro-slavery, so why did the revolution they did end with slavery being enshrined and built fundamentally into how they struck the country and the law and everything?
It wasn't based off slavery. The Revolutionary War was not based off slavery.
Okay,
so that's what you just argued. It was based off slavery. You're saying it was enshrined afterwards and based off slavery.
Okay.
You said that many of people who fought for the Revolutionary War fought for it because they were scared of how British were going to treat slavery in the colonies.
No,
That's exactly what you said. I reclaim my time. Most of that comes from the Somerset versus Stuart. That happened in 1772.
Shut up. Finish your point, and then Dylan respond to it.
Most of that came from the Somerset versus Stuart case to support the argument, and that was a case in Great Britain. It's in 1772. It did not refer to the British colonies at the time. It was a judgment of the English Court of the King's Bench in 1772 relating the right of an enslaved person on English soil not to be forcibly removed.
Okay, Dylan, please.
Okay. I didn't say that the American Revolution was just about slavery. I said there were people with financial interests who supported it and then worked once the revolution happened to preserve slavery, that made sure they were on the winning side, and many of them had a distaste for the British because they were getting very, maybe the slavery thing isn't so cool lately. I didn't say it was the reason the revolution happened, but to remove slavery from the revolution is absurd. You want to know another thing they didn't like? How there was a lot of stuff the British were offering to former slaves, like freedom, for example, that the Americans were basically chasing them at the back foot on because they wanted to also rely on black people with guns to fight the revolution, even though that made many people uncomfortable because giving black people guns during that war was scary for a lot of people. I didn't say it was the only reason, but there were people who supported the revolution because they thought they could use it to preserve the institution of slavery, and they succeeded. They succeeded.
Another thing they didn't like? Taxation without representation. That's
Good
another
for
thing they
them.
don't like.
And
Yeah,
I,
there are
what
many
is that-
there are many different reasons people support. There was nobody like lined up and signed. Oh, we're doing this because we hate tyranny. No, there are people have a lot of different reasons for being pro-revolution.
Yeah.
I think we'd all agree with that, right? Nobody's saying that it was just slavery.
Yeah, and sorry,
The
the
Irish did it
1619
just for
project
its fucking
actually
job.
amended. The 1619 project amended this, and I agree. Here's an interesting fact, okay? They actually consulted, 1619 consulted with historians, and historians, before it was published, pushed back and said the assertion that you're making makes it sound like all of them were doing it for slavery. That's wrong. And the concern is it's going to be used against your project if you put it in there. They decided to put it in there, which was a mistake. They later retracted it. But we're seeing the consequences of that now, where we got someone who's using this one sole point to try and demolish the entire, concept of the 1619 project, which is ridiculous. It's nitpicking.
John Adams, James Otis, Thomas Paine were all prominent founding fathers. They were all also opponents of slavery. And
Are you reading Wikipedia? What are you doing?
No, stop. I'm not.
That's
Can you give me a second? Okay. Also, every state north of Maryland after the Revolution took steps immediately after to abolish slavery.
Okay, great.
Okay,
So-
what about
so
all the
to
founding
argue- so
fathers
to
that owned
argue-
slaves and were pro-slavery? Do they just not count?
No, but what I'm saying is that to say it was enshrined when every state north of Maryland took steps to abolish it is a little bit inconsistent with the actual history.
You want to know
How many
something?
states are north of
This right
Maryland?
here
The
is a
South definitely
perfect
enshrined it. You
example
want
of
to talk
why
about
we
the
need.
South?
We
They
might.
enshrined it.
This is a perfect example of why we might need the 1619 project. Because what Fallen Noor right now is offering is a different perspective of history, the white man's perspective of history. Of any time somebody
Sprout.
brings up about this slave owner
That's not
or
fun,
that
Ross.
slave owner or the slave owners protecting their interests, is somebody has to stand up and say, well, this guy didn't like slavery. That's great. He lost. That guy was dead before slavery was.
Fuck
Wait,
that.
wait. That guy was dead before slavery was abolished. All those people you mentioned, dead
What?
by the time slavery was
So
abolished.
if you die in the pursuit of something, then you lost. Even if it's prior to.
When it came
so
to
no
the
no
fact
so
that
so
they did
stop
it
so
with
stop.
slavery in the United States.
What you just stated.
Stop. Let Dylan finish his point.
Yes.
The same way John Brown lost. Yes, John Brown did not have a successful revolution when he revolted against slavery. You want to know what did? Eventually, slavery was brought back. But when it came to the idea that America wouldn't have to deal with the impact of slavery and all of this stuff because they wouldn't have it in the Constitution, they did lose. Long term, that wasn't the case, but they lost the same way John Brown did. They lost the same way many people, same way that many Germans lost when they were fighting the Romans. Eventually, the Roman Empire fell, but that doesn't mean when we look at that historical conflict, we say Romans won, but 500 years later, they would be pushed out of this territory. That's not how we look at history.
That's how I
I'd
do.
like to just quickly point out that Dylan got me and Sprouticus mixed up. And again, I'd like to reiterate
I just
that
thought your camera was mirrored. I'm sorry.
no. I'm not against the 1619/1492 project as long as they're accurately named themselves to their cause.
Okay, great. So you can respond to that, and then I'll give counterpoints the last way to come move on to the next topic.
It's just ridiculous to think that people lost when they were in the pursuit of something when it came later on. To argue that they lost when later on they led a movement that actually won. They started the movement that actually won is ridiculous to think that they lost, but they started the movement that won. Okay, there's always going to be starters, and especially with some movement such as this, the people who start it are not going to live long enough to see it ended, right? So yeah, that's a ridiculous statement to say that they lost because they didn't live to see the victory.
What? Okay. Oh man, I'm just so frustrated. Okay, I'm just gonna. I'll leave it alone. Counterpoints.
It's okay,
please.
Prime. I'm gonna frustrate you even more.
For sure.
So basically, the reason why I have ironically encouraged right wingers to adopt intersectionality, because I think it's an interesting frame of analysis where you can look at class, race, ethnicity, income, background, parental analysis, like all that kind of stuff, in order to really break down like how certain things intersect in order to apply to people's lives. So for instance, I'm Irish. My people immigrated post-Civil War. We had nothing to do with that shit. British were fucking us in the ass the entire time. And then basically what happened was my ancestors were a bunch of fucking workaholic bitches and alcoholics up until World War II. And then with the GI Bill, they were able to leverage themselves into the middle class. The reason why I'm saying all of this is because there's incredibly interesting history that I think is worthy of analysis, including the abolition movement, including the abolition movement during the revolutionary time, including the abolition movement during the I brought this guy up in a Destiny debate, and Destiny basically shit his pants. There's a guy named Bartolome de las Casas. He was literally a lawyer who was arguing against the enslavement of Native Americans in like the 1400s, early 1500s. There are incredibly badass people who have existed throughout history who understood the evils of some of our social institutions 500, 600, 1,000 fucking years ago, and they were actively working to end these things. So we can look at why, I think we can all say that roughly 70% of humanity is hot water garbage. 30% of them are okay. And then 1% of them or 0.5% of them are actually truly exceptionally good people. And I think that analyzing history and the movements that these people start and finish is worthy of analysis. That's why, again, to articulate the 1619 position, this can be my closing statement. I don't mind the 1619 Project being a frame of reference and analysis for American history. I just don't want it to be central, because I believe we need a narrative that brings us all together, even if that narrative involves people that nobody gives a fuck about, like Bartolome de las Casas.
Could you get that name in chat so I can look him up? I'm actually really interested in reading up on that.
Yeah, so I just want to say it out loud because I'm lazy. Bartolome, Bartoleme, space DE, space LA or LAS, I forget, and then Casas, CASAS. Literally like a Dominican friar who became a lawyer who was arguing against Native American slavery in like the 1500s.
Okay, thank you. Boy, that was. Oh, no.
Next week, Prime. Next week.
I appreciate everyone who's contributed. It's good that we have different perspectives. You know, it's useful so that we can more thoroughly examine these issues. So thank you everyone for participating. All right, so we're going on to the next topic. Okay. As climate change worsens, the number of climate disasters will increase. The global north, which tends to be less affected by these disasters, has the resources to intervene when disasters take place. But should they have to, are richer nations obligated to help others? What if those nations need ongoing help from a persistent effects of climate change? Should the assistance of richer countries be perpetual? Okay, so yeah, climate disaster is going to be an ongoing thing, right? And there's other disasters, not necessarily be related to climate, but I just use that as the framing. But just disasters happen. How obligated are we to help these other nations? And especially if they need continuous help, should we be providing that? Okay, let's go with Chud Logic. Minute-long introduction.
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's two angles you can look at this from. If you look at this from a moral, ethical standpoint, wealthy nations have overwhelmingly in the past and continue to contribute to the problem of climate change, which will affect poorer nations. Despite them having less contribution to the problem. For that reason, I think from a moral or ethical standpoint, wealthy nations ought to help poorer nations deal with the problem. If that doesn't tickle your fancy, we can look from a practical standpoint. The consequences of the unmitigated climate change could be catastrophic. Unfettered immigration that could come about as a result of catastrophic climate issues, for example, creating climate refugees, could potentially overwhelm our countries, civic structures, resources, and so on. And that is alongside, the core ethical question of whether we'd be happy for millions of people, potentially to be wiped out in climate catastrophe. So it makes sense to offer whatever assistance is required now to both reduce emissions and to offer financial support to deal with any ongoing issues of climate change. And that's it.
Okay, Rodicus, please.
Yes, I think that if a northern country is not, and I'll use America as an example, because why not? So if America is not at war, or we're not fighting another, to where our resources need to go to this specific spot, where we just need to kind of pool our resources so that way we can be able to fight a war or fight what we need to fight, then yes, I believe that the United States of America should assist southern countries in being able to fight disasters, natural disasters. And as a matter of fact, in 2014, the United States Army it went to West Africa, particularly Liberia, to fight against the Ebola virus. With that being said, I think that that would be a great use of our United States Army is to do humanitarian efforts. Not only would it build goodwill, but it would be able to help those countries out.
Thank you. Counterpoints.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's said so far, and appealing to Doobie because I know he's going to be the most Machiavellian cunt on this fucking panel. Projecting soft power can also help you with hard power, whether it comes to trade, international relations. You can. So the only thing that I would appeal to people is don't be a penny wise and a dollar foolish. Make efficient investments in environmentalism, soft power, financial aid, and militaristic interventions. That way, you can get the most bang for the buck up front without causing global catastrophes later on. I'll leave it there.
Socks?
I pretty much agree with everything that's been said. I think it's good to go help other countries when they have natural disasters. And if we can do what we can here in the mainland to mitigate as much as we can the effects of global warming, since we're in that kind of perspective, I think that's a good thing. And I think it makes sense economically a lot, for our economy to help these other countries, whether that be for exports or imports or, just life sustaining for them as well.
DB.
I also sort of agree. So I don't think there's an obligation to these countries. I don't think that exists. Yes, even if we're the reason they're having climate issues in the first place, that doesn't fucking matter. But I do think it makes sense to help out these countries, because not only do we avoid the long-term consequences of climate refugees and hopefully soften the impact of all that nonsense, but we can use it to expand our sphere of influence, build some military bases in their country, direct the politics of their country in a way that favors us. I think these are all good things, right? And at the same time, stabilize them, hopefully make the world a nicer place. So yeah, I think that's fine.
Bring up something else that's interesting there, Doobie, but thank you. Let's go with Karan.
So I don't know. This is a kind of hard question for me because not even like in the case of these countries are having climate disasters because of like the global north output. A lot of the reason why some of these countries are poor in the first place is because of what the global north has done to them. So that's one part. But then also I've witnessed countries go ahead and pour in a lot of foreign aid into countries, and then they actually don't do anything to fix the situation. So I'm quite torn, and I'm unfortunately going to be a bit of a centrist on this until people persuade me one way or the other.
Dylan Burns.
So I would be in favor of aid to basically any country, unless any of those countries' leaders denied that in the early 1770s, many American slaveholders were scared that British common law would apply, and so supported the American Revolution. Except for those ones. But on this issue, I would say that I have actually always saw aid is for a lot of people. I think it's a way for them to feel better about themselves, that they took money, they threw it at an issue, and wow, that's amazing. And they don't see that day to day. A lot of aid programs don't work. A lot of them don't work. And I've always found that longer term investments made on a good basis of agreement is actually the stuff that's most successful. I think one of the reasons why Americans are so angry about the Belt and Road Initiative and stuff like that is because it's successful and it's working. Not only when it comes to the expansion of Chinese influence in the region, but that a lot of these agreements, African leaders actually view a little bit more positively than many Americans would like to think. Not all of them. When it comes to workers' rights and the use of local workers and stuff like that, there are problems. But I would say investments should be one of the major things we do, because I think people will be more welcome to the idea of investments and longer term economic agreements for long term growth and treating people as kind of like equal participants and partners and deals would be more of a positive impact. There are situations where I support aid. I would say a great example would be at any time a country faces a natural disaster. The recent thing when it comes to vaccines and us needing to support India as it goes through some rough spouts with the vaccines. And I'm sure that other people can show me certain instances where it's successful there too. But I've just always been a little skeptical of the U.S. Foreign AIDS Office successfulness. If it can preserve lives, good. But people need to know that aid is not a solution to long-term problems. Investments in long-term infrastructure building is. And so throwing food at hungry people is not going to mean they're not going to be hungry 10 years from now. You got to figure out a way to solve these issues past just handing people aid.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, follow me.
Fucking based.
Yeah, so Dylan actually just hit my point on 100%. It's actually my exact argument. The only distinctive difference is I would say that respective to the level of pollution should be respective to the level of investment requirements and respective aid requirements. I think that if you pollute more, you should pay more and you should assist more in cleaning up the mess that you made. If I go over to my neighbor and I burn their house down, I should be responsible for rebuilding their house because I'm the one who destroyed it, not my neighbor and my neighbor's neighbor. My neighbor's neighbor should help me pay for it. I should pay for it because I did the damage. The same thing can be said with pollution. We know where the pollution come from. We know what the pollution is. We've got thousands and thousands of global studies to identify where it comes from, that is. We've even got measured metric ton calculations per year and per diem basis. So there's no arguing where it comes from or where it's going. The only issue is who's going to pay for it, and that should be as obvious as the source of the waste itself is the people who create it. And we continue to skirt this very important question and delegation and relegation of responsibilities. And it's actually quite upsetting that we don't do something about it and force it into action even sooner than we're trying to.
Loner box.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. Maybe just a bit of a context framing. I think maybe it's not the best way to look at it when people talk about global north and south, because I think that does lead people into the path of attacking things like the global north lifestyle that they say is the most responsible for carbon emissions. But then when you look within the global north, then you find that it's like one small statistic. The richest 10% of earners in the world are responsible for 50% of the emissions in terms of lifestyle. So we know it's not just region, it's also within those regions. I'm actually, one of the articles I found has this really weird picture of a warped road because of the heat in New Delhi. You know, I think the buck would be stopping a lot more with the billionaires of New Delhi and places like America and Europe, more so than the working classes of the UK or America. And then I think Dylan already mentioned that. I might just expand a bit on the idea of long-term investment. I think ideas like what we've got here in the UK is the suggestion for a green industrial revolution. I think having that in Europe is maybe just as important as to have like a green industrial revolution in somewhere like Africa and growing countries. And then I'm probably a bit too tired to defend this completely, but I might as well mention that capitalism is an economic system that since its inception has depended on growth at a percentage rate, about 2.25% every year. For the consequences of that, that would mean somewhere like just recently, China consumed more cement in a period of 3 years than the United States did in the entire 20th century. That's what a global economy that depends on a compound rate of growth does. So you think where the world is now, you want 2.5% growth on that, and then the 2.5% the year after, it becomes an exponential curve. And I think there maybe is a question over whether or not our economic system at the moment is sustainable at all.
So if I may, can I pose a question to Dylan, or is there more?
Sure.
Okay. Dylan, you were talking about aid and how aid isn't always successful. And I would agree with you. Throwing money at a situation isn't successful. It's just a virtue signal of look how good I am. I'm just gonna toss money your direction and hope you know what to do with it. Such as give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. But with that, what do you think about the military when not in war status? being deployed for humanitarian efforts.
I mean, it depends on the instance. I would much rather have an international organization like the United Nations be doing this, but with the UN's history of raping civilians, then again, we've done some pretty bad stuff in some nations as well. And it's just not having enough supplies, not having the authority to do certain things. I find it a problem. I would just say that I would want to make sure that these humanitarian missions we're doing or for the humans, as in this isn't us going in to just adhere to only strategic interests, even though usually when we do a humanitarian mission, it's because our strategic interests aligned with the humanitarian interest. That we should be doing something that is usually supported, quote unquote, by the people. And that's a trend I generally want to follow, not in all cases, but generally in most cases, because I think a lot of times there's the guise of humanitarianism, but it's really for strategic interests. But if they align, then good for us. But I just want to make sure that we're not like faking ourselves when it comes to, yes, we're applying these sanctions because we care about the people. What do you mean they're hurting the people more?
Okay.
Um,
I would just I would just go to say that I think the military does a good job with humanitarian efforts. I don't think as we pull out of Iraq and Afghanistan, I'd like to see the military use more, the U.S. military use more for humanitarian efforts. At the same time, I don't think that we should be giving humanitarian efforts to Iran unless they prove that they're going to run their country better and that they're going to be able to actually be good to their citizens.
What do you
I
mean by
think
humanitarian
we
efforts?
should be humanitarian efforts, as in such as a 2014 mission going to Liberia to help with the Ebola, Liberia to handle the Ebola virus. We went down to Bolivia, I think a year or two ago, for humanitarian efforts down there, just to fix some things that happen, such as when hurricanes happen, such as when natural disasters happen. That's when the U.S. military, specifically the U.S. Army, will take a very humanitarian stance.
so this
So you
Oh
mean
wait,
just like
wait. I wanted to ask a question actually in response to that. So your issue with us providing, say, let's say, vaccine aid to Iran is that they don't run the country well and of their human rights abuses, right?
I don't think we should be assisting the Iranian government. If we could somehow I'm saying if we could somehow get into Iran and help the citizens of Iran without assisting the Iranian government and giving the Iranian government capital, then yes, I would be in support of helping the Iranian citizens without giving the Iranian government capital.
Okay.
But doesn't
So
doesn't I'm just say this really quickly, but doesn't increasing the popularity, right, the of the United States, for example, or any like foreign nation within Iran that would come in and provide vaccines to people there that are suffering, doesn't that in effect hurt the Iranian government because they're no longer to be able to paint the West or whatever as like evil outsiders or whatever the fuck?
Well, first off, the Iranian government wouldn't ever let us in.
Yeah, but that's not what you said. You said
We would have to. So that's why I'm saying that we don't. I mean, they're not. The Iranian government's not going to let us in to be able to do the humanitarian effort ourselves, which means we'd have to give the Iranian government vaccines, which means that they would probably give the vaccines first and foremost to people who thought the same way they did, who were very supporters of the regime in Iran. And then the least would be the people who don't support the regime in Iran. It would be a very tilted way of doing humanitarian efforts.
okay,
I don't think we
so
should assist in that.
if you're okay, but you're fine with us using our military to support Liberia, even though the same-sex activity has been illegal in the country for a very, very long period of time.
I think there's a difference between the laws that we don't like. Each country.
is the audio sorry. Is the audio breaking up for anyone else?
Chemical warfare.
Can anyone? Sorry, is it just me?
I think it might just be you. It sounds fine on my end.
Okay, I'm gonna leave the room and I'll come back in.
Same-sex relationships
Ahead,
being illegal. With that being said, I don't agree with Liberia having their same-sex marriages be illegal, but there's a whole. I believe that me and you, Dylan,
but it's
can
not just
agree.
same-sex marriages; it's
Okay,
like homosexual activity.
Okay,
They're countries.
okay,
They're
so
countries that.
I
well, let me.
believe, I
How
believe,
countries
would
that
it be
execute
I
legal
believe,
to
I
live
believe,
in
I believe
there?
everyone on this panel can come to the conclusion that homosexual activity being illegal is not as far as a crime as using chemical weapons against your own citizens.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know if
that's
I.
the
I don't
point
think
that
I'd agree with that, to be
Socrates is
honest with you.
making.
Yeah,
You get
in the
into
long
sticky
term,
territory when you're trying to like rank crime and I mean there's some obvious ones like burglary isn't as bad as murder, but stuff of that nature that's quite severe. I mean, what's the penalty for that? Is it death? Presumably, that's a moral
Well,
wrong.
The simplest way to look at it is if you use a law to criminalize homosexuality, the UN's not going to storm the castle and come slaughter your government. You start using chemical weapons against your population, you're going to get invaded so fast you won't finish America before you're carpet bombed into freedom.
Yeah, that's not
No,
true.
I just don't
That's
think it
true.
makes any sense to
That's
say
not
that
true,
one is
though.
worse
That's
than the
not
other.
true. Okay, so what about the fact that the United States was giving the Iraqi government information on how to use chemical weapons, specifically in helping them target Iranian military during the Iran-Iraq war? Like, here is the coordinates. We know you have chemical weapons. Do what you may.
Dylan, it's worse than that.
The thing is, it's not a question of, well, the UN or America gets involved when somebody starts doing human rights abuses, right? Because if that was the case, we wouldn't be allies with Saudi Arabia, we wouldn't be allies with with Israel. Hell, a lot of countries wouldn't be allies with us because of how we've treated our black population, how we treated a lot of people in our nation, right? It's a question of the alignment currently in the world of security, state, and humanitarian interests. We get involved when it's beneficial to us. Now, does that mean we shouldn't get involved? No. I think even though it was strategically beneficial to get involved in the Yugoslav conflict, there was also a deep moral reason to get involved in the Yugoslav conflict. The reason why you're particularly bringing up Iran here is because Iran works against our strategic interests. Therefore, we shouldn't give them aid. So I just don't want people to like make the thing that the reason we're not supporting them is because of the humanitarian reasons. No, the reasons we're not supporting them is because they work against our state interests.
I mean, I don't think we should support North Korea. I don't think we should support
Another
China.
country works against our state interests. Another country works against our state
okay,
interests.
but look at these countries. You have to tell me that these countries. You tell me these countries treat their citizens.
No,
and
I'm
they
not
don't-
saying that.
Okay,
But
they don't
what's
commit
something
mass
that's similar
tragedies.
between North Korea, China, and Iran? They all work against American interests. You want to know what the next one's going to be? Russia. What's going to be the one after that? Syria. What's going to be the one after that? Who knows? The thing is,
China.
No, he already
China
covered that.
again. The countries you're naming are countries that work against our strategic interests. You didn't name Saudi Arabia. You didn't name, I don't know, the government
Israel?
of Turkey, even though that was kind of on the line. You didn't name Israel. There's a lot of countries. And while I'm not equivocating all these governments
Israel's
as
an
being
attacking
the
its own
same,
citizens.
Wait, hold on, but it seems like the issue you have isn't so much with.
Oh,
Okay,
fuck
let's
off.
not. Please,
Get out of
let's
here.
not get into that. Please, that's bad. Okay, but it seems like the issue you have isn't so much with the treatment of the citizens; it's with the particular governments and how their governments are interacting with the American government. Because there are plenty of governments on this planet that treat their citizens really badly, right? I mean, you brought up Dylan brought up like homosexuality being illegal in some of these countries. It's basically like the form of like genocidal activity, right? Saying that just living as a homosexual in this country is dangerous for your life, right? That's very fucking bad, right? But you said you'd be okay with giving that country aid.
What's
Right,
the
so
legal?
it's-
What is? I mean, if you're just gonna put people to death for homosexuality, yes, I don't think we should. I don't think we should give them aid either, and we should instead go unless they're gonna let us in to give aid the way we choose. Like I said, China's not
But
gonna
the
let us
thing
in. North Korea's not gonna let us in. Iran's not gonna let us in. Whereas Liberia might. And Liberia did let us in to give aid as we choose. I don't trust these governments to give aid. I think these governments are going to give aid in a very depicted way that's going to hurt their citizens more than it actually helps. As much as we might think it helps, all we'd be doing with these countries I'm naming is Iran, China, these countries, North Korea, is we'd be giving them money or we'd be giving them capital. With that, they would then, and like Dylan said, aid isn't going to work. And so unless we can get in there and actually help out ourselves, then it's not going to work.
Same sexual activity, penalties, fines, floggings, beating, torture, vigilant attacks, prison time up to life, chemical castration, death, whipping, deportation for first-time offenders. People convicted twice face automatic execution. This is the law on the books for one of our top allies in the Middle East, the Saudi Arabian government. This is the laws I would face and many other homosexuals face if we were there. Do you think if there was something that hit the Saudi state, that the United States at any point would even blink at the concept of giving them aid? We're still giving them defensive support. The only support Biden administration ended was the selling of offensive weapons to them to be used in the conflict in Yemen. We're still selling them defensive weapons. We'd most certainly give them aid and other mannings. I just think that while it's nice to talk about the idea of like, we're doing this because we care, and maybe us on an individual level are, but we need to not pretend that these world governments are acting in a foreign policy framework to do it because they care. Sometimes these foreign policy frameworks overlap, and it helps benefit everyone. A great example would be a great example would be the toppling of Nazi Germany. Another example would be the ending of the Yugoslav genocide. But there's a reason why we got involved in Yugoslavia and we didn't get involved in Rwanda. Strategic interests.
Okay.
So here's my
Thanks. Great. I wanted to let him counterpoints. Has been waiting very patiently.
Okay, I want to make a quick point as well after
Yeah.
that. First of all.
Sure. So Dylan has said everything super fucking based, and I'm only sorry that our friend Liberty Sanity Project is not here to hear that fucking rant. It was beautiful. I hope he's in the chat somewhere. And I brought this up 3 fucking times, and he still hasn't addressed it. Everybody, go to google.com, type in the Rigel Report, R-I-E-G-L-E. I bring it up every single fucking time. And what this is for a decade leading up to the use of chemical weapons by Iraq against Iran, the United States specifically exported several dual-use technologies: botulism, anthrax, the precursors to nerve gas. So not only did we provide Iraq with intelligence on where to use these chemical weapons, but we also provided them the precursors. LSP said this isn't enough for us to say that we basically created a WMD program in Iraq. Guess what? This is like somebody selling you fucking, what is it, like Coricidin, fucking Scissorp, fucking Skittles and tea, and then you saying that you don't have the intention to fucking make drugs, all right? Like, get the fuck out of here. We knew what we were doing, and the reason why we went to the Iraq war in the fucking first place is because we knew he had weapons of mass destruction. Because we sold them to him 2 decades prior. So we were cleaning up a moral mess that we had created 20 years prior. And basically, like, this is all I'm just trying to affirm Dylan's point before shutting the fuck up for a little bit. We might do nice things some of the time. Some people might be saved by our violence, but it will always be an American geopolitical interest. Always. Every single fucking time.
I need to correct one thing.
Based.
France and the Soviet Union provided, I think, Iraq with the bulk of its chemical weapons.
It was Germany. But guess who continued to approve?
Okay.
Guess who approved State Department licensing for us to continue to sell dual-use technologies to Iraq? Our State Department. And not just that.
Yes.
Here's what you might be thinking of. When we invaded Iraq, post-embargo, we will fight about this later. Post-embargo, we discovered a bunch of French weapons where the French were still selling to Iraq after we had done the embargo and sanctions.
Okay, I just want to make a really quick point, just in response to what we're talking about. So the issue is you're making this judgment about the ability of a country to distribute aid based on laws they have on the books. I don't think that's a good way to do it. You could have a country where the punishment for homosexuality is death, which is very bad, by the way, obviously, and they could distribute aid perfectly fine and for the benefit of their citizens. You could have a country that is nice and not got those things going on, and they could keep all the money for themselves and line their own pockets. You can't use that as a way of determining how they'll distribute aid. The second point is, even if a country is got at the state level things that are bad, you're essentially then saying, well, because the government is doing a bad thing, you're going to starve the citizens, in as many words. You're not going to provide the aid, so you're kind of leaving them out to dry. So it's kind of like, okay, so homosexuality is illegal in this country. Well, there's going to be gay people then who not only have to hide their identity from the government, but they're not going to be able to eat because they haven't received the aid. So it's all just fucked. So I think it's a really bad way to look at how you distribute aid. That's it.
Okay, so
Just to add to that as well, there's a...
Okay, hold on. Sorry, we're gonna go in line. Fallenor, Loner, Sock, you raising your hand?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
so
been up for a
I'm
little
gonna
bit.
I don't know what you're doing. You're doing like a beta thing here, right? I need alpha palms, right? So out to the camera, right? Palm flat,
Uncomfortable, bro.
alpha palms. Okay, thank you. All right, see Sprout, that's a good example of alpha palm, right? Good work, buddy. All right, so I'll go to Falinor, Lorna Box. Katarana's doing a good job too. So Falinor, Lorna Box, Sock, Katarana, and then Sprout. Okay.
Okay, so one point I'd like to point out is why did we give aid to the Saudis at any point in any given time? They have more money than sense in most cases, and definitely more money than most countries. They also make up the majority of the tech investments in America, which represents the majority of our exports. So I've never understood at any point why we're giving them aid when they have more money than we do. The other thing that I'd like to point out is our perspective of giving out aid has never really made sense in terms of how we actually distribute the aid because we don't really define how that aid's distributed. And I think that Dylan nailed that on the head perfectly. Part of the biggest problem that we do have as a country is we don't control our aid programs at all and it's created nothing but disasters. A perfect example is the recent aid that we gave to Iran, which was then used to almost immediately purchase rockets, which were then leveraged to hammer Israel for how many weeks? Irrespective of your thoughts between the 2 points, the key point being is what counterpoints also hit on was the utilization of aid and the misappropriation, which Sprouticus pointed out. I think our biggest issue is the fact that we waste a ton of aid. And what I would like to see getting to the topic at hand in regards to climate is again, I think that in regards to the deployment of the capital, I think it should be deployed based on where we're going to use that. That's actually going to have a scientifically backed impact on the pollution and the unfortunate economic situations that have been impacted by that, such as fisheries, fish farms, shellfish farms, coastal farms and institutions, etc. I think that we should actually focus on those areas, both on investments as well as also in aid. And to do otherwise is just negligence.
Sock. Oh, sorry, Lorna. Excuse me, Lorna first.
Yeah, just about that point about whether we should base giving humanitarian aid depending on the laws of a country. In the case of Liberia, there's a big problem there because Liberia does have laws against, say, sexual assault or human trafficking, but they don't enforce them. So, and then I'm just looking at the executive summary on Liberia in particular. They also have laws against child labor that they struggle to enforce. There's a big problem with like arbitrary detentions and all that. So, yeah, I just don't think it's a very good metric. And Sprouts, because I don't know if I'm going to change your mind, but I could maybe give you an optics suggestion. Like if you want to use humanitarian conditions as a proxy to reject aid to countries that don't align with America's strategical interests, you probably shouldn't start with like North Korea, then China, and then Iran. It's kind of transparent.
So I do want to bring up the fact that that specific thing, the Ebola outbreak, which we provided aid for, there was a rumor that the reason, and this happened in Liberia, that Ebola happened was because of the gays. That they did so much gay sex that Ebola just happened, and that caused a larger anti-gay backlash. And many of the countries we would offer aid to, even if there's not even rules on the books talking about gay sex, the cops will look the other way as they're lynched. People don't know the history of anti-gay lynchings in this country, which still happen in this country, particularly anti-trans lynchings that I've seen happen in my own county, and I live in a Democratic state and a Democratic county. That was 2019. I had to go to the community meeting after 2 trans black women were murdered in my community. That's a little deviation. I just wanted to mention that quick. But I think we need to let go of this fantasy that states are working within the interests of everyone in mind. That's not the case. States work in favor, and this might be some realism, in favor of their own interests. That's how states function. That's how states will always function, and you're not going to see anything different ever. That's my personal opinion. That's from just reading international relations theory. Now, I see 2 paths, maybe 3 if you're a socialist. 2 paths for making it so this model, which is built on states looking through after their own interests. The first one is making helping others profitable. If you can make it So, hey, you make the argument. If you see me debate with conservatives on aid or investments or anything, I never make the argument you should do it because you're a good person. I'd say you should do it because if we stabilize said country, maybe we can make some money off of it. It's a sad reality, but it's one of the ways that are going to be most convincing to conservatives. The second thing, and this is liberal internationalism talking, which I slowly lose faith in day out. International institutions which are built from the ground up solely to advance the interests of human rights and of the people of the world. That's the second thing. The third thing would be abolishing capitalism, right? Which I'll let the socialists be the ones to debate that one endlessly, as I have little faith in that happening within my lifetime. Now, so I just wanted to throw that out there for anybody thinks that like maybe if the states were just nicer, maybe if the countries were nicer, because even the thing is, a great model would be to even if states act within their own country's interest, doesn't even mean they look after all their people's interests. America, we haven't looked after the interests of black people for a very long time. Native Americans, Asian people with the Asian Exclusion Act, all these people. And if we can't even get states to act in the interests of their own, all of their own people, how the hell are we going to get them to act in the interests of all the nations of the world and their people? It doesn't make sense. And so I think trying to make an argument of states should act more compassionate denies the reality of how states function on an international and global scale.
Thank you. Let's go to Socks, Catarana, Sprout.
No, I mean, I think boots on the ground aid is probably a lot more agreeable than just sending money somewhere, because I don't think that works out too well. But as far as like giving aid to Iran or North Korea or anyone that doesn't have our interests, I think like if they want it, I think that we probably should provide it, right? In some form of like, hey, if look at what happened during Hurricane Katrina, right? When the Mexican military, right, came into America to provide aid in the New Orleans area, right? And I think that's a very good example of like what we could do, because I'm sure the United States, had to either request it or allow it, right? And that's a really good example. They came in, they divvied out some water, made sure everything was safe, whatever, and then kind of just went back. And I think that's a really good example of like what I would like to see aid look like in these natural disasters, instead of either throwing money or, not doing anything just because they don't suit our political interests.
Let's go to Catarana and then Sprout. And then Kana.
Yeah, so I think the idea of going ahead and doing on the ground like aid is a lot better because as I've stated, I don't really think it makes very much sense for and of course I can't stop countries from doing it, but thinking more like in terms of their interests. I know it's stupid to say, but just once again, a lot of countries that have the circumstances that they have are just due to the fact that a lot of countries in the global north have essentially put them in that position. But for example, Haiti ended up getting $14 billion worth of foreign aid due to the 2010 earthquake, which is more than their annual GDP. And they still have rubble to this day from the earthquake because it wasn't done in a way in which there was any form of accountability guaranteed. And I think that's a really important aspect of going ahead and executing foreign aid is actually following through and saying if you don't actually do what you were supposed to do with this, this turns into a loan rather than just aid, because the amount of people that went ahead and created infinity pools instead of actually cleaning up dead bodies off the street as a result of the 2010 earthquake is atrocious. And I really don't think a lot of countries that we've put in certain positions have the infrastructure to really keep themselves accountable. So thus, if we are executing foreign aid, we need to make sure we're doing that.
Okay, let's go to Sprout and Kana.
I want to clarify what I was saying a little bit more. Is that these countries are welcome to receive our aid, if they on a stance of they allow us in to either administer or supervise the giving of the aid. I don't think we should just throw capital at these countries and just allow them to administer the aid. I think it'd be much more effective if I'm saying this because we're stepping out of Afghanistan, we're stepping out of Iraq. Our military is going to get paid either way. So let's use them towards a humanitarian effort. Let's use them to help other countries. We go over there, we either administer or we supervise the administration of the aid. And I think that would do. I think you'd see a lot more effectiveness out of the countries that get aid, and I think you'd see a better world for it. Not only that, but it would give it. And to bring a little bit to Dylan's point, it would provide strategy to the United States because it would give the citizens goodwill towards American soldiers. They would see the American soldiers out there helping their brothers, their sisters, their fathers, their mothers, and it would put a whole different light on the American soldier, and I think it would do a lot of good for the country or a lot of good for the world.
Dylan, you have a direct response to that?
Yeah. I first wanted to say the reason why I was so perturbed originally at what you were saying is because it seemed like all the nations you were mentioning that shouldn't get aid was specifically nations which the United States is at conflict with, right? And it was specifically Iran, China, North Korea, and am I missing one?
Yeah, I said Iran, China, North Korea. I said another one. I forget exactly who it was, but I said
remember
another
it
one.
not being one that we're very friendly with.
No, we
right?
weren't very friendly with that
We
country.
weren't very friendly with them. And so what I read that as, and I read that the same way I said it. And I think this was an automatic thing that you did. And I think it further shows my point I was saying that states act within their own interests. And that the only way we're going to be able to get American leaders to even conceive of throwing aid at Iran is by making it through the argument of strategic interests. Because I believe the vast majority of framers in international relations right now are still realists. Realism has been around a lot longer than international liberalism or all these other foreign policy frameworks. We got a lot more Machiavellis than we have UN aid workers. And when it comes specifically to the nation of Iran, or any of these other nations that we're not friendly with, I am in full support of giving them aid and supporting the population through whether it would have been COVID or food scarcity and stuff like that. The problem is, for many American strategic planners, that's going to be counterance to what we are currently doing in pursuance of our sanctions. That the sanctions are supposed to put a stranglehold on the economy. And so when Iranians look around, they say, we don't have a lot of food. We don't have a decent this or that or this. And our sanctions somewhat contribute to that on the international stage. And it's supposed to, in large part, probably inspire the people to overthrow. This also has to do a lot with nukes and a lot of other things that are going on, but that's one of the reasons. So I could maybe see an argument, and I guess this is the one I would make it to, hey, well, this wouldn't make the Iranian government look good, because if they only accept it under the premises of American government gets to go in and hand out the aid, or the organizations we oversee do it, and it all comes with a good old American flag, then the Iranian government would, of course, never agree to it. So then the question, this is where humanitarian interests are supposed to intersect with foreign policy interests, and it just doesn't happen. And that's why we're not really going to give Iranians, we're not going to give Iran aid. And Iran would never allow us to do it that manner, because it would make them look terrible and make us look great, and they care how the domestic audience views them.
So let's go. Thank you. Let's go to Connor and then Dubia. Sorry, Dubia, I didn't see your hands up previously.
Yeah, so weirdly enough, like we have to operate within the lens of lost sum gain. We have to operate within the realm of like competing priorities. I don't think there's necessarily a problem with tying like humanitarian interests with strategic goals. And also, I think this all needs to be balanced with American domestic security and domestic issues. So, for instance, we're talking about like aiding Iran. I don't know, the second or third. I think they might be the country with the second most large like proven oil reserves. They're also like an authoritarian theocracy that basically meddles with our allies. Fuck them. They can figure it out. And when it comes to geopolitical aid or something like that, I think we can prioritize our allies. I think what Sprout said is just true. It's just fundamentally true. Post earthquakes and post tsunami. So the Nepalese earthquakes, the Haitian earthquakes, the tsunami that hit Thailand in the late aughts, I guess, early tens, the American military was at the forefront of humanitarian aid, doing pararescue operations, delivering food, all that kind of stuff. And while it wasn't perfect, we now have a better relationship with, unfortunately, the failed country of Nepal, and also we strengthened some of our relationships in the globe. So I don't have a problem with the tying of American interest. And on top of that, it's like, Jesus fucking Christ, guys! Like, we got I don't know. Like, if we contextualize this solely within the original prompt of like, what do we do with people who have been fucked over with global climate change, I'm completely okay with like this whole line of thinking. But if we're just talking about in general, how do we set up infrastructure abroad? I'm okay with that conversation as long as it's balanced with like, how do we set up a domestic infrastructure? We have collapsing domestic fucking infrastructure. God damn it. Yield.
Doobie.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, like, so we've talked about Liberia, Saudi Arabia, all these countries that have really oppressive laws to certain groups of people. Does it matter, right? When it comes to, because this isn't just foreign aid we're talking about. What we talked about at the beginning of this was trying to circumvent or prevent like a refugee crisis, right? Another refugee crisis because of climate change, right? So given that's the case, should we even care about that? Because, you know, if we get hung up on this sort of thing, right? Even with like Iran or something, right? But so if we get hung up on the geopolitical stuff and the strategic interests, we might end up just not helping these countries, and then 50 years from now, we're dealing with climate refugees showing up at a door, right? So should we even care about this?
Well,
Yeah, penny wise, dollar foolish, right?
Well,
yeah,
Katarana,
think,
then Lona. Go ahead.
yeah, if the whole idea is to go ahead and prevent refugee crises, then this is definitely a good investment to go ahead and stop that, because at the end of the day, I mean, I'm sure some people will turn them down, but if the country is entirely like beyond repair due to the country being underwater, like, what are we going to say? Like, go eat shit? Like, why not go ahead and help them with being able to build up the infrastructure now, to go ahead and circumvent these things? Though we don't really think too much about the long-term things. We think about, like, there's an earthquake today, let's help with the earthquake today. Okay, we care about for a month and a half, let's move on to the next thing in the news cycle, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I think we definitely, no matter what the government is, we should be helping out, because if the whole idea is to stop a bunch of people from another country coming over, then this is the type of investment you need to make.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
you
even if
could,
they have laws on the books that oppress people that we disagree with,
the-
whether it's like LGBTQ people
Yeah.
or like apostates, right? In countries that are executed in some of these countries,
Well, at
and
the
we
end
should
of
still
the
help
day,
them out.
at the end of the day, what you're doing is helping the people of the country more than you are helping whoever's running the country, right? Like,
Yeah.
who's the main beneficiary of not having a climate crisis? Whoever is running the country, they can go wherever the fuck they want if the country is underwater. What it's actually going ahead and helping is the citizens of the country, and they aren't the ones that are putting these laws on the books. So I think no matter what the country's government is, if the whole idea is to go ahead and stop an overflow of 50 million, 10 million people from flooding into all these different countries, then this is what you need to do, no matter what the government's doing.
Okay, let's go.
I mean, yeah, you could. I was just going to say, you could have a country that feasibly, you say, is completely committed to the eradication of America, but there's some climate crisis that occurs that's going to result in that country creating 20 million climate refugees that could come to America. Well, it's like, what do? Do you say, well, we're going to help them, or do you say, well, we'll accept the climate refugees when it happens? Do you know what I mean? It's a difficult thing.
You know what? Actually, we have a great example for this. Thing is, I mean, northern states and East Coast states, which are Democrat states, are usually the ones that actually fork over money for states like southern states, which is the Republican Party, who are 100% dedicated to the destruction of America. We give them aid all the time through federal funding and our tax dollars going to help their social programs. So I'm fine with that on the international stage.
Let's go, Lona. Go ahead.
I think there's, as well as just the thing about maybe even the premise of the question with aid. I don't think anyone here actually believes that aid is going to be the answer to climate change. Like, we've had this with other issues as well. Like, they've been saying that aid was going to fix poverty in Africa since like 1950. It got worse in some parts of Africa. Like they had in Congo, you had one of the worst humanitarian crises ever just in the last decade in Congo. And whilst their biggest donor was the United States, the local warlords that were presiding over that humanitarian crisis in Congo were linked to American mining companies. So there definitely needs to be like a much broader question about this, because it's kind of like aid is a reaction to climate change, right? So wouldn't that raise the question of, like, say if America becomes the biggest donor for climate catastrophe, but then it's also one of the biggest carbon emitters, then you're kind of like just using your left hand to fix what you broke with your right hand.
Okay. Sorry, can I interject, or is somebody on the list?
No.
Okay, I can interject.
Yeah. Sorry, you can. Please go ahead.
Okay, cool. All right, so number one, I don't know if y'all are aware of this. I was just made aware of this 2 days ago. There's now an electric Ford F-150. Okay, the writing is on the wall. There's now a Ford Mustang that's electric. All right. Basically, American car companies understand as 50% of carbon emissions are transportation. American car manufacturers understand that. They're already making moves. Within 30 years, transportation emissions are probably going to be significantly reduced. Lab-grown meat is on the horizon. I think they've already approved it or they're working through trials with the FDA. I think they were saying that they were hoping to have it on shelves by 2022. Lab-grown meat, if you don't know, the other 50% of global climate emissions is agriculture. So methane from cow farts is literally fucking killing us. With lab-grown meat, you can essentially eliminate 90% of carbon
It's cow burps.
greenhouse gas emissions.
It's burps.
So
it's less farts. It's burps.
Cow burps. Okay. Okay, fair enough. But the point being that we're working on the problem. We just don't know if we're going to get there fast enough. On top of that, I think Elon Musk talked about like 30 million for investment for like carbon capture technologies. We just don't know what the world is going to look like in 30 years. And so what we have, the term that I want y'all, I'm going to give you another homework on top of the Rigel report, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a psychological concept. It basically says that this is what people need when they need it, what they want when they want it, all that kind of stuff. And basically what it says is you have to build out fundamental basic human needs, security, then social, and then economic and egotistical fucking desires.
Yeah,
the reason why I bring this up.
They teach this in every market.
So the reason why I bring this up is because basically if we look at the Congo, where it was a insecure place that then suffered worse material conditions than they have within the past like 50 years, the problem is because these fundamental infrastructural things weren't built out. And this was Dylan Burns's original point that I'm just going to keep hammering. It is so much better to maybe misappropriate Maslow's hierarchy of needs in order to conceptualize how to build a society than it is just to give out aid or deal with refugees. We have to have broader thinking about these concepts.
So to Dylan, back on that point, well, maybe not exactly that point, but Dylan, do you think that it is also rational for states to refuse aid, right? Like when, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly, when Venezuela refused aid from the U.S. So you think it's not, even if that aid may come with either strings attached, or might be a way to like infiltrate the country or do.
It makes sense. It does make sense. It makes sense from 2 points. Number one, when America is the nation applying sanctions and is a geopolitical foe of Venezuela, the last thing they want to do is make them look good or give anybody in Venezuela the idea that the reason why they have the little food that they do have is due to the American government, not the Venezuelan government. And that'd be a major reason for them to want to refuse aid. I mean, there is strategic reasons for wanting to refuse aid. Because aid for a lot of people is just PR. It's not actual, like, I am throwing this over there because I want to see this issue tackled. A lot of it is legitimately make me look good.
But if Venezuela, say Venezuela needs aid right now, and we offered to give it by giving them troops and giving our troops money to be able to actually do a humanitarian effort down in Venezuela, right? If Venezuela denies that aid, wouldn't it almost look worse that to their citizens
No.
that are starving, that they denied the
No.
fact that they could get food?
Let me put it this way. Let's say Biden just said on TV, "Hello, Americans. We are accepting Iranian aid to deal with this issue we have. There are going to be Iranian soldiers in your community handing out." Wait, Iranian soldiers in my community? Yeah, good luck with that. Good luck with that one.
So, Dylan,
But yeah,
when
but
you say that,
it's not brand new for American soldiers to do humanitarian efforts. This isn't brand
Yeah,
new.
but-
This has
but
been
yeah,
around for a
means that
long,
everybody
long, long
wants
time.
there.
Do you think Venezuelans know about Ebola projects or could possibly think about what letting American soldiers enter their territory willingly when the option of invasion was proposed by the Trump administration one administration ago, and the Biden administration still is not strategically aligned with them? There's no way in hell they're going to accept it.
You've
Yeah,
got a
and
very
Iran also-
American-centric
sorry, Iran-
viewpoint.
Iran also sent humanitarian aid to Yemen. They still do that.
Okay,
I
Karani, you
had
wanted to say
thought-
something? But Vulpes Phonics, I just want to say, Vulpes, thank you for the subs. That's really kind of you. Sorry I missed it before. But go ahead, Karani.
Yeah, no, the question was like, Dylan, you're saying that there's reason for Venezuela to not take it, but is
I'm
it
not saying good
appropriate?
reason.
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking. Like, should they take it, or is it like what exactly?
I mean, any
Not if
aid
they want
you
to stay
can-
in power.
any aid that they want to take, any aid that could be provided that could help people for the people is good. But for the government and the state's interests in preserving geopolitical like alliances and foes and stuff like that, that's different. A lot of times the state's interest does not align with the direct immediate interest of the people under that state. An example would be a foreign war. There might be many benefits for America invading X country and having troops there permanently, but those benefits, whether it be strategic or otherwise, might not be felt in the immediate term, and sometimes not even in the long term during that war and conflict.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Anyone else? Want to follow that up?
No, we're good.
I mean, I just want to add like one little caveat that I know I'm being like awful sensitive today, but when it comes to even if another country were to go ahead and help with administering the aid, I just feel like there needs to be a bit more of a strategic plan than, okay, the whites are going to come save you today, because there's been examples of like in the case of Haiti where the UN came in to help with the 2010 earthquake, and instead what ended up happening was a really large spread of cholera. It ended up killing about half the amount of people as the earthquake, so it actually ended up killing a whole bunch more people because the UN didn't make sure that there was proper that they were using the bathroom in proper places. It was getting into the water supply, and then a bunch of people ended up catching cholera, dying, going blind, etc., which even further exacerbated the whole issue of the 2010 earthquake.
So I actually wanted to expand on that. This whole idea of accountability. You said that previously, Karani, for holding these countries accountable for how they administer aid, or if they're going to, like for instance with like Haiti, there's a lot of aid that was promised but just never arrived. It just once the cameras went away, once the tension from the world seemed to dissipate, then it just disappeared, right? Okay, so is that even a possibility? Like, is that just a pipe dream to ever hold like countries accountable? If you say you're going to get aid, or if when you're in that country, as Kataran was talking about, like if you're not operating properly, because like another thing that happened in Haiti was Oxfam, the whole Oxfam scandal. I'm not sure if you guys remember this. Oxfam was giving aid like it does usually, but it was found out that workers there were asking from sex from like women, right? Like for aid, right? So if you want food, you want to be able to feed your family, sleep with me. This was a thing. It was just like a systematic thing that was happening there, right? It was a whole huge scandal. So one, like actually, is it ever possible to hold them accountable to actually give the aid that they promise? And then two, when aid is being given, and I'm sure Oxfam's the only one who did that, but like when aid is being given, if it's if corruption is happening, can we do something about that? Or is it that since they are in a position of power, being that they're the country giving and the other one is taking, that's a complete impossibility? I like counterpoints.
Yeah, so this is really where I want lefties, especially internet lefties and Twitter lefties in particular, to kind of open up their eyes a little bit. Any social institution that's run by people is going to be as flawed as the people that run them. So I'm sure Oxfam did plenty of good shit, but obviously there was people who took advantage of desperate people, did some nefarious shit, and as a result, we're now talking about this scandal, and basically instead of helping people, we're hurting them. Same thing with if we were to try this with like law enforcement, aid in general, concerts. There are probably thousands, maybe tens of thousands of incredibly well-motivated people who want to help in a genuine way, and they're taken advantage of by criminals. So what I'm basically saying here is no, like I think there's a certain level of accountability that you can expect where we can demand more, but at the same time you have to also expect some level of corruption, nefarious manipulation, nepotism, bribery, scandal, all that kind of stuff, because people are imperfect and they're shitty. And when you hand them tons of money and power, they are going to get, they're basically going to say, I'm a rich, powerful person. Please play with my wiener or my clitoris. And that's what they're going to do.
Doobie, did I skip you before? Like you had your hand up. Did we get to you? I'm sorry.
No, I had nothing else to add. I was just wondering if people thought that we should be moralizing at these countries when really, at the end of the day here, what we're trying to prevent is a refugee crisis, right, with this primarily. So I don't know if it makes sense to moralize at them about their laws and how they oppress people.
Do you all think that it's so? What Doobie was talking about, like climate refugees, right? Like, do you all think that it is inevitable that we'll have a sort of what people are calling like climate fascism or something? At the very least, that when these people are trying to come, instead of opening, our borders, opening our arms, and welcome others, because there'll be more successive waves of immigration, right? Because of these crises, that we will instead only be building walls. It seems to be what we're doing now, right? Telling them to go away, don't come, don't bother, right? You will be turned away from the border, right? Do you think this is an inevitable path? Do you think this is the only path available to us, right? Maybe you're thinking the crisis is too big, and we can't absorb them. Do you think that's simply a natural reaction, or is there another way that we can respond?
Well, I think that this is the other way, right? So rather than waiting until that happens and we need to turn these people away because you can't absorb millions of people into the country that easily. You try to do something about it up front. You try to prevent it as best as you can. So that's why I was asking if it makes sense to like moralize at them. Well, not maybe you can do the moralizing, right? You can say, hey, this law you have is bad. Shouldn't be doing this. But I don't think that should prevent us from giving the aid and trying to prevent the crisis in the first place.
No, but not just aid. I mean, like in terms of like immigration, part of that aid might be taking in refugees, right? Like a state is failing, and there's been some sort of disaster, or political unrest, because those things are tied together, right? And part of it might be simply taking in people, right, to help the state be able to recover, because it simply can't support that number of people anymore. Could that be a possibility? Could we change? Go ahead.
Well, we've already seen it go ahead and be done. I guess some of the question would have to be maybe we should go and see now, almost 10 years later, what was the effects of that? If at the end of the day, it wasn't really beyond people's just general xenophobia, which I don't really give two fucks about whether or not the people are like, oh, scary brown people. I want to know what are the actual effects. Was there anything that happened in Europe when there was that really huge absorption of a lot of different refugees due to all of the arrests in the Middle East? And if overall, there were no negative outcomes, or at least the negative outcomes are very, very insignificant in comparison to everything else, considering the amount of people. Then I think that should become more normalized, that we go ahead and absorb refugees, because that's just part of being
You're
a human.
not going to be in power for that long. The whole consequence of the fucking mass immigration from the Middle East and North Africa was basically the right wing, like becoming almost like we're still seeing the momentum of the right wing popularizing from the mass immigration wave of the 2010s. And on top of that, I think the only reason why it's crested or troughed is because immigration has troughed. So if you say that our policy is going to be like, oh no, we'll just take everything, no problem, that's not going to last very long. I'll tell you that.
I don't mean just literally taking every single person. It's not like any one country in Europe was the one that went ahead and absorbed everybody. It was pretty well distributed throughout the whole region. And I think at the end of the day, if it is either have the rise of right wing parties or conservatives, or literally have millions of people eat shit and die, I think I'll go ahead and try combating conservatives over that any day.
Let's go to
I think there's
Loner and Dylan.
Fair enough.
I
Loner,
think there's a slight confusion of correlation and causation with that immigration argument, because typically, there are exceptions, typically the parts of the world that have the most anti-migrant or anti-refugee sentiment are the parts that don't have any. The problem with Europe during the refugee crisis was not Lesbos or Sicily, it was Hungary, where they didn't fucking know what a refugee looked like. It was Poland. It was those weird towns in England where like everyone's white and everyone owns a horse. Like that's so. If assuming a climate refugee crisis is inevitable, the best way to curb xenophobia would be to fill Wyoming up with refugees, and then they'll realize that they're humans and they'll be all good.
Okay, you saying that shit out loud makes me fucking jump off right. Okay, holy shit.
oh boy.
Well, maybe that's a you problem.
Because you are.
I'm being half serious, but yeah, that would be a you problem.
Dylan?
I'm just according to research. All right, like
It'll
extreme
be
right
our
sentiment.
problem.
Extreme right sentiment is the strongest where there are less immigrants and refugees.
Dylan?
According to
thing
research.
is-
I live in super white Central Florida.
You know what? We shouldn't legalize gay marriage. You know why? Because it might
It'll anger the
piss-
right.
it might anger the right, and we might get a backlash. This civil rights thing, like that sounds all fine and dandy, but it might piss off the right. This women voting thing, okay, the gals, the broads voting, that's pretty interesting, right? But have you ever thought on how I don't know who was big in the 1920s, the Jeffersonians, I don't fucking know, how they would react? The thing is, we can acknowledge that there's going to be a backlash, right? But us saying that we should do something, or it's a right policy to do, is particularly trying to set us up to counter that backlash. Like if I went on TV and was like, hey guys, we should accept refugees. Refugees are people. Let me interview a bunch of refugees and show you how lovely human beings they are. I think is a lot more productive than standing up and saying like, well, we might help the Republicans if we let in a bunch of refugees. So that's the end of this conversation.
Yes, let's make it into the conversation,
Yeah.
please.
Well, I don't know. I think that kind of like implying that everybody who had a problem with the way that the refugee crisis was handled in Europe were just like racist white people, and totally dismissing the disruption that this crisis had on the lives of just normal European people living in their towns, right? And then suddenly all these people are coming through the area. There's a lot of crime that did happen. You have people from totally different cultures suddenly in the same space and clashing, right? It's not just racism and just people being afraid of brown people. I think that's really silly. Now, again, that doesn't mean that it's okay, right? It doesn't mean it's okay to just say, to like throw all these people out or whatever. Personally, I don't give a fuck about them. I'd be okay with the United States keeping them out. But if you're a little more compassionate, I guess, to these people, yeah, that's fine. Right. But I think that that's why it makes sense to try to deal with it up front by helping these nations, prepare for climate change as best we can. And then, but again, I just got to say again, just labeling all these people who had a problem with the refugee crisis is like racist and shit. Or saying that, you know, it was the weirdo towns where it was all white people that had no refugees. So this was the only place people had a problem with refugees. That's really silly. Like that's just not reality.
It's true though. It's
Okay,
like
so
this is
the
what this
thing
is like.
is-
The places with high refugee populations are not the ones that become the cave to the right.
Yeah, well, anyone with any place with high population counts typically is not right. Typically, when you talk about the highest population per city block, right? It's typically not right. It's typically blue. That's just typicality. When you're more spread out, typically it's a more red area. When you're more compact, more people per city block, then per square mile. It doesn't matter what you want to say. Then it's typically blue. So your argument of when there's a high capacity of immigrants in a certain area, it's typically blue. Of course, when there's a high capacity of anybody, it's typically blue.
That doesn't explain differences on a national level. That doesn't
so
explain why
I just
Hungary
wanna-
is more racist than Germany.
Okay, so first thing I want to say is, in 2018, Germany reported its lowest crime rate since 1992. That's the first thing I want to say. Number two, the Sweden crime spike. A lot of that can be just plainly classified through the reclassification of crimes. And as certain things that they used to not consider crimes being reclassified that specifically had to do with sex crimes. As before, sexual assault was a lot more violent, then they reclassified it towards certain types of things are now considered sexual assault. There has been an increase in migrant crime, but that's also because there's an increase in migrants. That's going to happen. Counterpoint is angry. He's rubbing his forehead because he's trying to deal with the brain tumor that developed from him saying things during the end of this panel. I understand, right? But the thing is, the benefits of taking in the people and the lives saved, which is different from what me and Doobie like care about fundamentally. I care about those lives. Doobie doesn't. He's made that very clear. That's the difference in priority. Since Doobie doesn't care about these lives, he can be like, okay, whatever, be compassionate. And so I just want to make clear to everybody that I guess maybe I just care about all humans, and I would like to save as many as we possibly can in reasonable grounds. Doobie is very more self-interested, and that's the divide here. It isn't like we disagree on some basic facts, maybe the crime stuff, but it's a difference in interests.
Yeah,
Okay. I need to. I know I've been huffing. Hold on, Doobie, let me get in, please.
Go for it.
So I know I've been fucking huffing and puffing. My frustration with this conversation is not so much that I give a shit. I kind of have. I'm a civic nationalist. Okay. I believe that there are certain fundamental principles, I've talked about them in the fucking past, that I think are essential in order to maintain society. When Prime asked me earlier, like, why do we need a historical narrative that binds us as a country? Dylan, you just look more beautiful when you do that. That's just hot. Like, stop. All right. So anyways, so Dylan, stop being so hot. As I continue, I think that you have to have a binding narrative as a nation. It doesn't have to be the perfect story. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but you have to have a reason for why people like living next to each other. And if they don't like living next to each other, you have to find a reason for why people like living next to each other. And you have to come up with like fundamental principles of how to keep a free society functioning. I've already identified my 3. If you want to hear me rant about them, I'll rant about them when you ask me. But this is like, the reason why I get so perturbed when we have these conversations is because you can say that I don't know, the Calais jungle, the Bataclan attack, Bastille attacks, Pulse nightclub, like all these things are not big deals. We don't have to worry about them because they're statistical abnormalities. Well, they're a big deal to me. I live 20 minutes away from Pulse nightclub. I lived in Boston, basically where the bombing happened was someplace that was a few minutes away from where I was born, basically. I lived in Belgium. That was where the Bataclan attackers were from. I've been to Paris. Like these things matter to other people. You can say that they're statistical aberrations. You can say that they're small. You can say that they're not that big of a deal. You can say that you're being emotional. You're not using your fucking macro utilitarian hyper fucking woke goddamn brain. But this shit matters. So if it matters to me, and I'm a fucking like centrist, who most of you progressive cunts mistake for a leftist half the fucking time, then you can guarantee it sure as fuck matters to the right and the conservatives, and you have to live with you have to live to learn with the fucking conservatives. I know you can fucking meme on Twitter about fucking what is it? The fucking what's the head chopper thing? The fucking
why are you so fucking hung up on Twitter? You mentioned it like 3 times. Who fucking cares about what some idiots on Twitter say? Fuck me, get over it. Jesus.
Chud, I'll care about your opinion when I see your actual face. Get the fuck out of here.
That's a fucking easy.
Because why do I care? Why do I care about the opinions of other human beings with
You're
whom I
terminally
share
online.
the planet? Yeah,
You're terminally online.
Question.
You're terminally online. I'm sorry to tell you. I've diagnosed you terminally online.
Okay,
there we go.
No. Fuck that. Fuck that. Because I'm not worried about terminally online fucking narratives. I'm worried about what Dylan just said.
Why'd you keep complaining about it?
And what Katarana just said. I'm complaining about it. What the fuck are you talking about?
You've said Twitter about fucking. You've mentioned it a number of times about some bullshit on Twitter. Like, why'd you complain about it if it's not an issue?
Okay, you're a fucking 3D wrestling persona.
Yeah,
okay, don't talk to me about being terminally online.
Here.
I'm fucking straight. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay, Dylan, did you have a response?
Okay, you don't need to get racist, okay?
Oh man.
No, because I don't even think he talked about me. I mean, my main thing would be just, I understand that there's right wingers. You need to live with them. Our job, is to do everything possible to make their opinions on the matter change, and still advocate for good policy. Just because something's unpopular doesn't mean we drop the issue or we don't advocate for taking up the correct policy. It is that advocacy for the correct policy that will help bring about that correct policy. A great example would be either the liberation of gay people, the liberation of any people in history, or I think in the future we'll finally come to terms with the fact that death penalty is fundamentally flawed and will never work, and never has worked in either decreasing crime or the innocents it's killed, or how it's disproportionately used against black people, or to protect white victims of crime. Just because the death penalty is popular now doesn't mean I should say here, like, well, you know what, I could advocate for the abolition of the death penalty, but that could be unpopular. It is our job as people who are commentators to go out there and advocate for it.
That's not even what the
as
fuck
commentators, it's also, I mean, I just find it funny. I'm personally not going to say the right is right about everything. But it seems when I talk to the left, there's this common conception of we're right on everything, and you guys just need to listen to us, and we're just going to keep changing minds, and these are the 100% correct policies. I think that in between the left and the right, if we come to the middle ground between the left and the right, that's truly where we need to be, is the middle ground. And if the right and the left would come to a table and come to some median solution, I think that would be the best for the country. But every time I've talked to a leftist on Twitch, anytime I've debated with the leftists, it's always been, we're just gonna keep talking to people until they get the correct point of view. We're just gonna keep
have you ever argued for a position that you thought was wrong?
No, I'm saying I have, but the idea, so what I'm saying.
Just checking.
Wait, what?
Do you ever come to argument saying, I think I'm wrong, and I'm going to argue on something that I'm wrong about for hours, and I know I'm wrong? Like that's.
Oh yeah, I've done that, but I've also specified before that I'm doing a hot take, and I'm not actually being serious. I'm just doing it for content.
Right, but I don't think it makes sense to be like a radical centrist about this, right?
Okay, either way, I'm gonna.
Sometimes one argument is just correct, right? Sometimes the left is correct, sometimes the right is correct.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense to say, oh, you always need to come to the middle and agree somewhere.
So all I'm saying is when I talk to the left on Twitch, when I debate with the left on Twitch, we're always right, and that we're just gonna keep changing minds because we have all the correct policies. That's what it is. It's all the time. Every time I talk to, and I'm the first person to admit, I don't think the right's always correct.
Think they're wrong?
Okay.
I don't think the right's always correct. No, I don't think the right's always correct.
Okay, wait. This is about me. This is about me.
I waited a while.
But
so sorry.
I will not respond then.
Okay, hold on. Let Dylan respond to that. Then I will go to you. I promise, Fauner.
Okay. You want to know what, Sprouticus? I do believe the positions I hold are correct. That's why I hold them, and that's why I advocate for them. You probably believe the same thing and are going to advocate for the same things. I believe people should come to my positions because they're the correct ones. Okay? That's what I believe. And so when I argue about putting in policies or convincing people onto my position, it's under the premises that I've come to this position because I think it's correct. This feels like just nitpicking.
Okay.
No, I
let's
just find
go.
I just find it funny.
Let's go. Let's go to Falinar.
Really
He's been waiting
hilarious.
patiently, and then
I just want
Kadar.
to say it's a strange day when I'm one of the calmest people in the room making the least amount of straw mans. I feel like a weapons dealer at a World Peace Convention. But yeah, one critical point here that I would like to make, and I've been waiting a while to see if anybody comes to the same consensus. But collectively, in regards to the topics of left versus right, the question that nobody seems to have asked is what is the actual solution? I mean, we're talking here about responding to a natural disaster like a hurricane. Everybody always talks about sending the soldiers or sending the military or sending money. The question is what is the answer to a category 9 hurricane that's a world-ending event? Like we're talking about superstorms that are coming that are reaching record-setting levels that are hitting buildings that were never designed to respond to these. There's a distinctive difference between sending aid to a situation where it's like, oh, well, you got hit with a category 4 instead of a category 3, so here's some money for cleanup, to, hey, you just got hit with a hurricane throwing off tornadoes that just flattened 6 fucking cities in a row. Like, that's not an aid situation. That's a send in a building crew with some caskets because we're rebuilding everything that once was civilization. Like, there's a distinctive different conversation here, and I think this is the bigger piece that nobody's talking about.
Go ahead, Kadar.
Yeah, I mean, nobody here except for Dylan is really like a foreign policy expert. And like, as much as I could sit here and prescribe like what I think should be done, I don't work for the UN, so it's kind of moot. But outside of that, I don't know, like it was kind of strange. I wanted to go back to Counterpoint's point because you were saying like I'm a bit like more worried about these things because it's what goes on near me. But I mean, in that, I would just kind of ask you to challenge your bias a bit because when, like, for example, I grew up like 20 minutes away from Parkland, but like, I don't get scared of like every white person on the street corner, like it's kind of,
Maybe
yep.
you should, Katarana.
Well,
Maybe you
I
should.
mean, for all you know, I'm actually like trembling on this panel. I'm just like, oh, so much mayo. I can't
So many
handle.
honkies.
Yeah, I mean, but like honestly, like just the same way that like the amount of people that are immigrants going ahead and executing like terrorism is very much an anomaly. It's the same type of anomaly when it comes to who's going to go ahead and create a domestic terrorism. But like we don't really get that afraid of like whether or not we should let like scare like lonely white kids out into public, right? So like I guess maybe we should think a little bit more about like, yeah, people from all types of backgrounds can
Multiple
go ahead and have
multiple
moments of radicalism, and like it doesn't matter what the background is. We could literally never let in another immigrant starting today, and you would still have a school shooting issue, which is a lot more prevalent than having actual religious terrorism within the country. So I guess just kind of challenge that a
Okay.
bit.
Okay. Listen. I already know I'm fucking sensitive about this goddamn issue. I fucking know it. All right. So I'm conceding that before I continue. All right. Here's the fucking thing. Multiple bad things existing all at the same time is not a reason to say that bad things don't exist. Maybe that's not what you're saying, so I'm not trying to strawman you. But so for instance, you're talking about like disaffected, disappointed white kids who seem listless, and because they're listless, they take their anger out on their communities by slaughtering dozens of people. That's a fucking problem. Air problem doesn't mean it's not a problem. And we have solutions to that problem. And oftentimes I find myself at odds with liberals and progressives and leftists when I propose what I think are conservative solutions. Same thing with jihadist terrorism. We can talk about how 70% of jihadist terrorism, 80% of jihadist terrorism, 90% of jihadist terrorism is the material conditions in American foreign policy. Okay? Those are variables that we can control, and we should control them. Another 10% that I think is ideological. And just because you can control 90% of it through the changes in foreign policy doesn't mean you don't try to control the ideological. And this is where I get really frustrated with like laissez-faire, like liberalism or whatever, where it's just like, oh, you just believe whatever you want to believe, even if what you believe is nefarious and fucking shitty. No, we fucking call these people out. We name the ideologies. We break down the ideologies. We educate people on them. We talk about them publicly. And when other people are talking about publicly about nefarious ideologies that do fucked up shit, we don't play hide the fucking ball with 20 goddamn cups about what's going on. No, the part of the reason why we get into this problem every single time I have this conversation is because we agree on the material conditions portion. Okay. Lefties want to solve the part of the world that's solvable, but there's still another component to it that nobody wants to address. And whenever I fucking bring it up, we play hide the ball. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. So,
Counterpoints. Can I try and build a small bridge to you on that topic?
bridge building on a
No,
Twitch channel?
I'm
I feel-
emotional.
The fuck?
I
Leave
feel
me
very
alone!
bad. I feel very bad for turning you into a groiper earlier, so I'll try and reverse the deed. So when it came to
they're
what was the
Chris
fucking
Nets.
question?
I'm a Civ
With
net,
what-
don't
with
worry.
what you were talking about, yeah, that's the good one. Yeah, with what you were talking about with the refugee crisis in Europe, I would concede maybe 2 points where the EU like massively fucked up. One was that compared to the way they reacted to the global financial crash, they got every state together very quickly and amassed an insane amount of money within the space of a few days. When the refugee crisis happened, every country turned its own way and said, "No, you guys, you do you, you do you." There was no coordinated effort to spread the influx or to make sure everyone was appropriately taken care of. So that's definitely one thing that, like one country getting 1 million refugees and another getting none, is probably like that kind of flow at the same time, in conjunction with a ravenous right-wing press, does not really help. And I do agree with what you said, that I think that, you know, when people from different cultures live in the same place, there should be such a thing as some broad degree of common values. What values those should be, I'd maybe be interested in knowing. And then when you were talking about the Bataclan and all that, well, yeah, of course, like, isn't it the case that yes, people should be educated or should be able to feel safe around immigrants, the same way that immigrants, say in the UK, should not have to worry about being assaulted or even seized by the state for being accused of whatever, being a groomer or a terrorist sympathizer. Because at the moment, for Muslims in the UK, you're about 5 times more likely to commit a terrorist attack in the UK if you're a Muslim, but you're 40 times more likely to be detained under counter-terror strategies. So, and yeah, so you can concede that that's a pretty radicalizing condition to be under.
Gonna concede? Yes, no?
Yeah.
No, counterpoints.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, yeah, like this actually, I wouldn't mind having this being a separate subject because basically, like when I hear stuff like this, I think there's probably like a lot of nuance to this, right? So the same way
don't
you can
take too
create
long
like a
with it.
self-fulfilling prophecy when it comes to enforcement.
Don't take too long with it. Just
Okay,
yeah.
well, I mean, just tell me the point that maybe I should be. Okay, so let me say this then. I think that the reactionary right-wing position of just being like, no, people who follow a different religion are bad and we can never understand each other. Get these motherfuckers out of my country. I think that's a dumb as fuck, 0 IQ fucking take. But I also think that inversely, the let's take everybody and we don't have to have a cohesive narrative is also like a negative 50 IQ take. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance to the subject. We can talk about it another time.
Who is making those arguments? That's the key point, because I agree that there's sure people saying that, and it's silly. Obviously, you need to have like integration. You can't just have someone coming from an area that's been absolutely destroyed by war and they've got mental health issues, problems, etc., and just slot them into the country. Be like, right, off you go. Thank you very much. Obviously, there needs to be something to deal with that. But I'm just wondering who specifically is out there saying, oh yeah, bring them in. No borders, etc. Like that's of any meaningful relevance or a significant thing to worry about.